Hey all, how you doing today? I'm having kind of a morose one, I gotta be honest. So, kind of a rainy day, kind of a cool day. So, I'm gonna start with the one I made up way back. This is probably the oldest song I ever wrote. All God's angels, they won't comfort me, won't help me with my heartache, won't help me with my pain. And my demons stopped amusing me. They remind me of my failures and they'll haunt me till the end. And I don't remember how it's supposed to be. Living life like I was born free. I'm so beat down I can't find my way up off the ground. And what's a man supposed to do? What's a man gotta say to succeed while still staying true, or to make it safely through each day? And I don't remember how it's supposed to be. Living life like I was born free. I'm so beat down I can't find my way up off the ground. And what I want with all of my might is to live under God's blue sky. And I'll struggle and work and fight for that right, and I'll be that way until I die. Yes, I will. All I want is to live like I was born, and all I want is to live like I was born, and all I want is to live like I was born free. Yeah, but I don't remember how it's supposed to be. Living life like I was born free. I'm so beat down I can't find my way up off the ground. You know, sometimes it's just nice. It's just nice to play that one. There's something cathartic about it. To take on the sadness of the world or the gloominess of the day. To have it inside of you and then to just let it back out into the world. And to know that the world, even though you're sad or angry or depressed or whatever feeling you're feeling that our society tells you to just push down and forget about, to move on anyway, just soldier on, pull yourself up. But when you let that out into the universe lets you know it's okay. It's okay. It knows what it's done to us. It knows that it's hard. And I hope that when I sing a song like that for you guys, we all kind of shed a tear together. And I guess that's called solidarity. Hey, Crouching, how you doing, bud? Well, sexy, John. I could use that today, couldn't I? Hey, Mystic, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Good to see you. Always with 1 foot out and 1 foot in, eh, Mystic? We got a beautiful shot here today. Hey, Misty, how you doing? Got a beautiful shot here today of our lovely Toronto. Wonderfully shot. The Toronto sign becoming steadily more and more internationally famous as time moves forward. Lovely shot of it lit up at the night here. Yes, Germany is handling their capitalists very well, thank goodness. And it's because, if you ask me, it's because Germany knows what happens. Like, they know what happens very well, better than the rest of us. Like, we have a abstract understanding of what can happen with capitalism. The Germans do not have an abstract understanding of what can happen with capitalism. They have a very fundamental, real experience about what can happen with capitalism. And they know that if you continue to abandon people, if you continue to create circumstances of desperation, that figures like Adolf Hitler are going to come out of them. And I suspect that for much of Europe, the rise of Donald Trump was terrifying. Like, we have a kind of cartoonish view of Donald Trump. And we have a kind of it's like Donald Trump is a curiosity or a one-off or something like this to us. But for the Europeans, they look at Donald Trump and they're terrified of him. Not necessarily because of who he is, but because of what he represents. That if a figure like Donald Trump can rise up from the American system, then a figure like Adolf Hitler can too. And will, should the Americans continue this path of abandonment that they're inflicting on their own population. And so in the face of that, I think the Germans are very, very much doing everything they can to move away from the capitalist model. Like, we keep talking about moving away from the capitalist model, but Germany's doing it. And their political system and their political structure has allowed communists and socialists to actually be involved in meaningful ways. And so they're actually doing something because they know what happens if they don't. Because they know what happens if they don't. What are your thoughts on right libertarians like myself? I think, like, if you're talking about American libertarianism, like, and I'm not saying this to be insulting, Mystic, but it's kind of incoherent. The libertarians stand up and say that they're all about freedom, that what they want is complete freedom, right? But when you actually listen to what they're talking about selling themselves to multinational corporations, to decouple government regulation, like to get rid of government regulation. Well, if you get rid of government regulation, you're basically ceding all power and authority to a corporate state and allowing the corporations to make the rules. And I'm also quite concerned about how the proponents, like the major proponents of libertarianism, when you really get talking to them, they end up sounding like crazed sociopaths, right? Like the abandonment of children, the abandonment of any kind of responsibility for community building or society building whatsoever. It's like a washing of the hands of the responsibility towards the poor and the disabled, any of that kind of thing. Very, very concerning sort of stuff. And I also find that in a lot of cases, the libertarians are willing to move forward with highly experimental and radical ideas. Like in terms of healthcare, for example, the ideas that libertarians have surrounding healthcare, no other nation has moved forward in that way. Like, we have working, functioning models. Right? 133 countries in the world are using socialized medicine and socialized healthcare. and it's successful. And so if you're in the middle of a crisis, the last thing you should be doing is experimenting, even if it works. The last thing you should be doing is experimenting. You should be moving forward with models that have been tried, for which there is evidence of support. And for healthcare, that's outright the socialized healthcare model. There's lots of evidence to show how successful that's been. I struggle with libertarianism because they keep telling me that they want to create a free society, but ultimately what they want to do is sell everything to massive corporations and let the corporations write the rules and let the corporations run the show. So it's like a defense of neo-feudalism in a way. So I have a difficult time with libertarianism, and it's more concerning to me than lots of things. Hey, Macht, how you doing? What have you said here? Wer hat uns I messed that word up. Die Sozialdemokraten. Meaning, who betrayed us? The Social Democrats. The SDP seized power after Wilhelm II abducted, and instead of forming a socialist state, they betrayed their own ideals and made the Weimar Republic. Yeah, exactly. Like, for those of you, to explain it a little bit better, the so-called liberals, right, the Social Democrats, who were in Germany before Hitler seized power, really paved the way, right? They paved the way basically with their inaction, mainly. It's not that they did anything. Like, this is the thing. Like, people, I get to talking to people about this, and they say, well, they didn't really do anything. And it's like, that's the problem. Right? And very much the same way Biden and these Democrats are basically doing nothing, right? That, like, well, they haven't done, but yeah, they're not doing anything. They're not actually resolving the issues that exist in their society like they could be. And so they're paving the way for a very repugnant figure. It probably won't be Trump, honestly. I actually suspect Trump will be defeated in this next election. I think that that's probably likely. But that's just because I think people are tired of Trump as a figure, right? But what comes after him? I just don't want high taxes, my gun used for self-defense confiscated, and a vaccine getting injected in me against my will. So that's three really interesting points. I just don't want high taxes. Yep, I think everybody could agree with that, especially in America. Like, you wouldn't be complaining so much about taxation if you were getting health care, if your roads weren't crumbling, right? If the police were actually working on behalf of the citizenry instead of the capitalist state, right? You wouldn't be complaining so much about high taxes if they actually got you something. But what your taxes buy for you in America is little Palestinian corpses, right? That's what happens. So the complaints about taxation are warranted, but require a bit of contextualization. Like, if I was paying high taxes, but I got, here in Canada, we get free healthcare, right? Any healthcare you need, you get taken care of. If I fall over, break my arm, right? I'm not going to have $100,000 debt to pay or something like that, right? So I find that American libertarians saying they don't want high taxes, what they're actually saying is, they want something for their taxes, right? That they don't really, because if the choice is between getting something for your taxes or not paying those taxes, I mean, both of those are reasonable positions. 50% of your federal tax goes to pay for the war machine, right? Like, don't you think there's something else that you could use to be better? So, I mean, that's a respectable position, but I just think it doesn't tie into the critique of... I rarely hear libertarians critique the imperial nature of their taxes, right, and their taxation system. My gun's used for self-defense confiscated. Yeah, like, communists actually are pro-gun as well, right? Like, Marx said straight out, like, no, if people should have guns, we should be able to protect ourselves from the state, for sure. And a vaccine getting injected in me against my will. So there's an interesting one, right? There's an interesting point that's worth conversation. The vaccine, and timely. Should there be a mandate? given, like, it's a health crisis, right? It's a health crisis where the people who don't get the vaccine are allowing this virus to promulgate and to continue mutating and to render the vaccine that we do have less effective. That's the big concern. Hey, Ruth, how you doing? Why do people think that the majority have no rights? Only an entitled or the loudest complainers do. Yeah, that's a good point, Ruth. Like, in the case of this COVID mandate, like the vaccine mandate, it does seem like it's well, and in America, it's almost 50-50, right? Half of America is not vaccinated, and that's going to allow the virus to continue mutating and continue moving forward. Right? It's going to allow it to cause more damage and cause more problems. And eventually the virus will mutate and kind of sidestep the vaccine that we have now. Like, that's probably preordained at this point. I don't think we avoid it. Right? And, like, you can see how very clear that is. Like, there's China's most populous provinces are Guangdong, Shandong, and Henan, with a combined 330 million people, approximately the same as the US. Interesting, Guangdong, Shandong, and Henan have suffered a total of 37 COVID deaths, compared to the US's 706,313. Enjoying your capitalism? Like, there's something to be said. There is something going on in American capitalism that is preventing this virus from being tackled and taken seriously. And at this stage in the game, we are going to want to, we are going to face a mutation that renders all of the work that we've done up to this point irrelevant. It is going to happen. I don't see how it can't, right? Like, I mean, I hope it doesn't. I would prefer if we sidestepped the whole conversation completely and just COVID went away and we all went back to rebuilding a society, hopefully without capitalism involved at all. But it's something to be concerned about. And so in the face of that, in the face of the reality of that kind of truth, should we move forward with mandates that we all hoped in the West that people would just move forward sensibly and just get the vaccine by voluntarily. But now we're seeing that there is not an insignificant group of people who are not going to do what must be done. And it must be done. Like, it must be done. Like, that's the thing. Like, and it's not about like, and it's very confusing, this conversation of the right of the individual, because people are literally going into these ICU units as deniers, and saying on their deathbed that they wish they had have taken the vaccine. So I feel like we're getting to a point where we're getting a real good look at our society. We're getting a real good look at our society, and we're starting to see that, like, oh, this is what happens to a society when you infuse a good deal of selfishness into the society. It's very tough. Hey, Matthias, how you doing, bud? I think the conversation is misconstrued. If the super wealthy actually paid taxes, it would make sense that tax cuts would happen for everyone else. Yeah, there's a bit of that too. Like, I mean, the wealthiest people in the society don't pay taxes. That's been well documented, right? Your Elon Musks, your Jeff Bezos, right? Amazon, all these guys, they don't pay taxes. And so that puts the taxation burden on everybody else. And if you are in that situation, I can completely understand why you would want to have an anti-tax movement, right? But the trouble I also have is that I worry that hey, Chris, how you doing, bud? I worry that the anti-tax movement is just been co-opted by corporate power, because ultimately the goal of corporate power is the full destruction of the government, right? That's what they want. Because if the government is gone, then they are the ones that are in charge. because they own the means of production. They've got the capacity to make things and to manufacture things. Everyone must pay fealty to them. And so that's the ultimate goal. And what's a great way to destroy the government? Just ensure that it has no revenue base. Ensure that it can't actually do anything, right? That would be a grand way to destroy the government. Well, Trump started it and conservatives use it. I'm no longer interested in their stupidity. I've lost my empathy. Stop treating them when they get sick. Proven statistics show it's a con Republican virus. They're dying because of it. Well, I have a touch more, because I used to have this position as well, Ruth, and I understand where you're coming from. Very much so, I understand where you're coming from. Because it's exasperating. Like, we're getting a real good look at our society, and it's exasperating. But I saw an article recently where a 24-year-old kid died of COVID. A Republican, of course, in a Republican state. And that really made me realize, like, man, when I was 24, I was falling in for all kinds of weird little traps and things like that, right? Like, I didn't really have a firm grip on anything when I was 24. And this poor kid is listening to these politicians and listening to the people, you know, the right-wing talk show hosts and all this kind of stuff, who they themselves are turning around and getting COVID and many of them dying of it. But, like, so what's his sin, really? Like, his sin is listening to the people that you're kind of supposed to listen to, or that people think is reasonable to listen to. And in many ways, I do look at these people in the United States who are dying of COVID while simultaneously not getting the virus and all of this. And more and more, as I'm moving forward, I'm seeing them as victims. That they are victims of a system that has betrayed them. That there isn't a single institution in the United States that exists for the benefit of the populace any longer. And so no one trusts anything. And you've got institutions like the CIA, which exist explicitly to deceive the populace. And so no one knows what to believe anymore. No one knows where to go. And so from that, it makes sense that eventually people would turn against the kind of common knowledge or the common source or any of this kind of stuff, because they don't trust them. Right? How can you simultaneously not trust your media, but then when a vaccine comes through, right? So you've got a real, like, boy cried wolf situation going on here. Only the difference is that it's not the boy. It's not the boy getting punished, right? It's the villagers, because it would be like, imagine the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? We all know the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? You have a boy, he comes in, he cries wolf, there's no wolf. He keeps doing it. And so then when a wolf actually shows up, right, none of the villagers believe him, and then he gets eaten by the wolf. Well, just change that to the boy cried wolf, nobody believed him, and then the wolf went in and ate all the villagers, right? Leaving the boy alone. That's the circumstance that we're in. And so I've actually got a great deal of sympathy for these people, because I feel that they've been lied to so effectively and so often that what we're witnessing is, sure, there's like a stubborn digging in of the heels and all of that kind of stuff, and my body, my right, that kind of thing. So, which is hilarious from a group of people who also don't allow that opinion to exist in regards to abortion rights and things like this. But the reality is that what we're witnessing is a society that's in conflict with itself and is in complete confusion. Doesn't know what to do. Doesn't know who to turn to, doesn't know who to believe, doesn't respect authority figures, doesn't respect any of this kind of stuff. And so here's the consequences, right? Here's the consequences. It's a complete systemic failure in my perspective. And I don't necessarily, like, I understand how, it's tempting to blame the individuals who are in that system, but they just don't know what to do. They've been confused. They've been bamboozled, right? And what's sad is that even their politicians and the people who support them, like when Donald Trump stood in front of these guys and said, "Go get your vaccine," and they booed him, right? You can see in that clip that Donald Trump is like exasperated. He's exasperated. Like, they've created a monster and they don't know what to do about it because they can't, and now it's getting so bad that if they actually do mandate it, if they do say we're mandating this vaccine, everybody must get it, they'll have a gunfight on their hand. People will pick up arms. They will shoot back. They will shoot back. And capitalism is killing us, but we can't blame capitalism. Yeah, that's quite a pickle. That's quite a pickle, right? Yeah, the same people who are standing up and saying that communism is scary, right, are incredible victims of capitalism. The 1914 to 18 influenza epidemic has a lot of history that you can read for free online. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of good parallels. Fox and the Republicans are culprits and should be held responsible. Same with Kenney and Saskatchewan Premier. Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that if you're in a position of power, right, like it's one thing to be just like a citizen walking around and you don't know who to listen to or you don't know what's going on. And you don't trust anybody anymore because everything's been taken over by corporations and they're all lying to you constantly. And you know it. You're aware of it. But if you're like in a position of power, like a position of prominence, you should be held accountable for that. Somebody like Tucker Carlson, for example, like Tucker Carlson should be in jail for what he's done, for sure. And I think that's pretty black and white, honestly. Like I don't think that there's much of an argument that needs to be made. It's not a free speech issue, right? You're killing people by conning them. That's what you're doing. And I think the line has passed. The society is collapsing, not just the climate. Yeah. I've been listening to more and more prominent voices saying that they're anticipating some kind of civil war, some kind of falling out, some kind of major conflagration. You don't end up with a situation this tense with like 600,000 people homeless, people dying of a plague, right? Like you don't, and violence is going to break out. Something is going to happen. It's going to be, and like take a look at what happened January 6th. That was just the start. That was just the first shot across the bow, right? That if the Democrats actually took that seriously, they would be passing a universal health care system. They would be passing major reforms to the system. Major things would be happening. But they're not taking that seriously. And so it's going to get worse. And the next conflagration is going to be much larger. It's going to be much larger. Like imagine January 6th, except those guys were armed. Like really imagine that. Imagine the January 6th insurrection, except every single one of those people had a gun. Right? Like, that can happen. Let's not pretend it can't. Right? America is awash in guns. It's actually a miracle that there wasn't more of a conflagration on January 6th. It's a miracle that there wasn't more bloodshed on January 6th. Right? And as these people are getting further and further abandoned, right? And they are getting abandoned. Abandonment is what it is. Like, it's exactly what we're watching. They're going to get more desperate, and eventually they're going to pick up guns and they're going to use them. It is at this stage an inevitability. Like, I actually am of the opinion that even if the Democrats started to do major reforms and started to push through things, that even if they were doing that, we would still have something like that happen. Because it takes time for these things to unfold. And America has gone so far in the wrong direction that it's becoming almost unbearable. Like, I'm surprised that Americans are not already in full-scale revolt. Like, that's what's surprising to me. Like, why isn't there actually, where's the Occupy Wall Street movement again? Like, we've done that before. That wasn't that long ago. Right? That was what? That was like 12, 13 years ago? That wasn't very long ago. Right? So where are these people now? Like, why can't we surround the halls of power? Why can't we surround the White House? Why can't we surround the Pentagon? Like, why can't we surround these places? We had hundreds of thousands of people in the street for the Occupy movement. Where is it? It seems odd to me that it's not manifesting itself. But only time will tell. Only time will tell. A communist attempted the January 6th attacks on the U.S. Capitol. Police would have used drones with thermal vision. Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't, like, for some reason, like, don't get me wrong, the people who who did the insurrection attempt are facing jail time. Like, there are serious things that are happening to those people. But, like, if it was Antifa, like, if it was actually, like, a left-wing communist movement that did that, there would be massive tribunals. It would be like a show. We would still be talking about the show, right? But for some reason, the January 6th insurrection just kind of gets swept away. You know, oh, well. The only reason there seems to be any movement on it whatsoever is because the populace doesn't seem to be willing to let it go, right? They talk not do, Biden was calming, but Bernie would have done more. Yeah. And I mean, that's what people voted for, though. People voted for a talk not do candidate. They wanted like a nostalgic return to the Obama years where, you know, Obama completely sold them out, but he spoke well, right? And Obama and the Democrats do a good job of making things boring. Bumbleguppy, I live in the U.S. and watched my peers vote for neoliberalism proudly time and time again. I completely expect people here to praise their tormentors and literally expire before revolting. Yeah. It does seem like a form of Stockholm Syndrome, right? It does seem to be that way. Like, I take a look at the Conservatives here in Ontario. They continuously vote for Conservatives who are actively abandoning them. Like, when you get old here in Ontario, you end up in a shithole. Like, you end up in a bug-infested, like mold-infested shithole. And that's Conservatives. Conservatives have done that. And they just keep voting for it. And I fully expect to hear stories soon of people saying, like, yeah, my parents keep complaining about these long-term care homes that they're in, but, like, they keep voting Conservative. I don't know what to do about it. Like, that's what they're voting for. And that speaks to the same thing that's going on with this COVID situation, right? That people are confused. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand the system that they're in, right? That the most insidious form of propaganda, I think, is this individualism line, because it's convinced large segments of the population that there is no such thing as systems. Like, that's a huge boon for the capitalist death cult, right? Like, what's the line, right? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. Well, if you convince people that systems don't exist, then they don't notice when you destroy them or privatize them or wedge themselves into them, right? And if people stand up and start saying, hey, we need to create new systems, or we need to reform the system, or we need to put in a new system, you can just say, oh, that's communism, and that's the end of the conversation as far as they're concerned, right? It's pretty blistering. Most of the Occupy movement has been completely disenfranchised from the system. Many are done trying to make the system work and have given up. Many are just waiting for open conflict. I think you're right, Chris. I think you're right. Like, we are in a place now where open revolt is all that's left. There isn't anything left. Like, we can't reform the system. Like, that's not happening. The electoral system is not allowing candidates in who are actually interested in solutions, right? This last election here in Canada was obvious. What did we have? We had the neoliberal Liberals, the neoliberal Conservatives, the neoliberal NDP, and the neoliberal Greens, and the neoliberal Bloc. So it was pick your color, basically. It really is what it is. Like, it's just sort of pick your color, pick your avatar, right? But it's the same game, right? Nobody's standing up saying the system itself needs to be removed or even reformed in serious ways, right? And meanwhile, over in Germany, they're expropriating like 240,000 apartments that they literally are just like, no, you capitalists don't have this anymore. Right? And we literally can't, like, what are our politicians saying about our housing crisis? Oh, we'll build more housing that the billionaires will instantly buy. Like, we're so deeply entrenched in this failed system and this failed ideology that I don't think, like, I don't suspect our electoral system will respond rationally to it. And in fact, the electoral system that we have in place will work against it. Like, this is why it's dangerous to have billionaires. And they have so much wealth and power right now that they have superseded any electoral system that exists. That the electoral systems more and more are just seeming like an illusionary facade. right? Like WWE wrestling, right? Like if you genuinely believe that Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan were actually enemies at any point, like that Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan were actually enemies, right? Then you can believe that the Democrats and the Republicans are not allies. That's the big thing I'm seeing right now online. I see a lot of this. Like there's been a lot of like Republican dumping that's been going on. Like lots of people are dumping on the Republicans. But they just don't realize, they just don't recognize or realize that the Republicans and the Democrats are allies, that they work together, that the Republicans are fine if they're the heel right now. That's the point, right? You're supposed to have a heel, right? So you can have a hero. If you don't have a heel, you can't have a hero. And they're completely fine with what's happening right now. And people are really dumping on the Republicans right now because the Republicans voted against raising the debt or any of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, so, but they know. Like, they know. And then you see all these memes about how, like, oh, here's the Republican strategy, right? But it's like, dude, if you genuinely believe that the Republicans have a strategy for attaining power, right, and it doesn't intersect with the Democrats somehow, right? Like, the Democrats and the Republicans work together to pass the ball back and forth to, so the Republicans make the populace angry, so they switch over to Democrats, and then the Democrats make the populace angry, so they switch over to, and we see that here in Canada with the Conservatives and the Liberals, right? And it's a game. It's done on purpose, right? So that the winner is neoliberal capital. And the, and people seem kind of willfully unaware of this. And if you point it out, it to them it's such an extravagance. They think, oh, that's literally the attitude. Just like, that's outrageous. That's outrageous to believe that the Republicans and the Democrats are allies. It's like, of course they are. They go to the same places. They serve the same people, right? They literally have been managing the exact same war, right? Like they're the same organization. They're just different colors, right? And they work for the same people for the same goals. They go to the same places. At this point, you have to kind of willfully be unaware of it. And if that's the case, well, then the only thing, and I understand why they don't want to admit it, because that means that the road is much more difficult. It's kind of nice to believe that, oh, maybe I'll put this paper in this ballot box and this time it will matter, right? And you just kind of keep doing that. Oh, this time it'll matter. This time it'll matter. This time it'll matter. And nobody actually wants to admit that, like, oh, we actually have to surround the halls of power. Like, that's what we actually have to do. There's no other way forward. We have to surround the halls of power. It's a much more difficult course because you have to confront police. You have to confront the elements on the street. You have to confront other groups that are organizing against you, right? It's a much more difficult road, much more time consuming. Not the politicians yet, though. That's why they feel safe lying like they do. They'll always lie. They'll lie until literally they are dead. Like they're so bought in at this point. They can't do anything but. And I noticed that as they experience no consequences, their lies are becoming increasingly weird and obvious. Well, and I actually have a theory on this as well, which is that I think some of these guys are getting off on the lying. I think some of these guys are getting off on how extravagant and weird can we make these lies? Like, what are these people actually going to buy? And I guarantee that some of these guys have been drinking champagne with their buddies, bragging about the lies that they've been telling. I guarantee that that's the case. Because, like, it's got to give them a certain level of pleasure to tell such overt and obvious lies. Right? It's just got to be the case. That's a big thing these conservatives don't realize is how they have about 1/4 of their lives awaiting for them in their elder years. About 80% need some sort of care and social assistance. Exactly. Like, the alternative is, like, put them out on the ice floe. Which, here in Canada, we've got the what's called the MAID system, which is the medical assisted dying system, cutely named MAID. And my position on that is that, so now we have assisted dying. So what we're going to do is allow neoliberal parasites to take over our systems, and the neoliberal system will dismantle everything and make it unbearable for people. So if you have a disability or you're elderly, right, you'll live in a shithole, and that'll be on purpose because they can always just get you to suicide out. And they'll structure the system somehow to make it so that if you suicide out, they make money, right? That's what I expect. I fully expect to see this happen. That the MAID system will be co-opted by the neoliberal death cult in order to just funnel the elderly and the disabled into an early grave. Like, oh, no, he said that he wanted to do it. Forget about the fact that we're literally torturing them every day. Like, literally, like, abandoning them and putting them into shithole conditions, right? The conditions that already exist are evil. Evil is the word to use. And the idea that, like, the solution is going to be like, oh, well, you can just suicide out, right? I've heard the craziest thoughts from Carlson and Hannity. Oh, yeah, of course. Those guys are nuts. Like, those guys are, like, literally nuts. Like, they're well, I mean, I actually don't think that either Carlson or Hannity have any viewpoint. I think that they are a mouthpiece, and they understand that they're a mouthpiece. Especially some of the interviews I've seen with Carlson tells me that he understands that he's literally just reading a teleprompter. Like, he doesn't actually have opinions. He doesn't have, he is an empty vessel, right? He is just empty. And he's just allowing himself to be filled with this Nazism. And the PPC, speaking of the PPC, right? Bernier sees larger role for People's Party after it almost triples vote count. Right? So in this last election, we had a tripling of the votes for the People's Party. An enormous, enormous, enormous success for the PPC. Something that we should be very, 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 very concerned about. Yeah, making it free to get proper medical treatment so they could live, like most of the world already does. That's evil. Start imperialist wars and provide assistance to euthanasia. That's fine. Exactly. Exactly. Because we're the good guys, right? He admitted he lies on a Charlie Kirk interview or something. Yeah. No, I mean, there's all kinds of... Before he got on Fox, Tucker Carlson had a very open interview with some radio DJ where he was just saying, like, oh, yeah, like, yeah, I'm just going to have to spew a bunch of bullshit now. Like, because of stuff like this, where Jon Stewart exposed Tucker on Crossfire, right? A lot of these news organizations wouldn't allow Carlson on their shows any longer. Right? And so Tucker kind of knew that, well, Fox is it. Like, I don't have any other place to go. And if that's the case, then I'm going to have to just spew a whole bunch of crazy bullshit. And what's interesting about Carlson is that sometimes he tells the truth. That's unlike Hannity. Hannity never tells the truth. But Carlson occasionally does. And it's very strange. Like, it's very... I suppose that they need him to do that to maintain any kind of credibility, right? But you're seeing how everything is fracturing, right? Like, I mean, for goodness sakes, only 1 in 10 Canadians happy with the outcome of federal election. Only 1 in 10. Like, how is this anything but a full-scale admission that the system has failed, right? Only 10% of Canadians are walking away from the election feeling happy about it. Like, that is a crisis. I said it yesterday. There was an article we read yesterday about how 77% of Canadians think that Canada is more fractured now, more than ever. 77% of Canadians think that the nation is fractured now. And now there are polls coming out saying only 1 in 10 are happy with the outcome of the federal election. Like, this is a dark moment. This is a dark moment. And if our electoral systems do not begin producing results that actually impact the populace in meaningful ways, then the populace is going to act out in serious and meaningful ways. And we should expect that to happen. We should expect to see that. And it shouldn't be surprising, right? If when we get another January 6th insurrection with more armed people and guns and there's actually gunfire, we shouldn't be surprised about it. because the electoral system is simply not responding to their needs. Like, America has 600,000 homeless people, and there's literally no movement in the government whatsoever to ameliorate that. Literally zero. And in fact, it's quite the opposite, that they are lifting rent moratoriums. They are making things more difficult. They are guaranteeing that there is going to be an increase in the amount of homeless on the streets. So not only is the system not responding to the needs of the populace, they're doing everything they can to make the problem worse. And here in Canada, with only 1 in 10 Canadians happy about the outcome, with 77% of the society saying that the country feels fractured now more than it ever has been, we are begging for an organization like the People's Party to gain power. That an organization like the People's Party, it tripled its voter count in this election, and it can triple again. And if it triples again, it gets seats, right? And once it gets seats, this can start to snowball. And this is an organization that is very, very scary. It's very, very scary to watch the People's Party talk and organize themselves, because not only because of their overt and obvious white supremacy, which is apparent for literally anybody to see. You have to be in like a massive state in denial to miss this. But it's even more terrifying is that they don't believe that systems exist. And I've said this before, that if you don't believe that systems exist, then when you're confronted with a systemic issue, you can just push it aside and say those people need to work harder, right? And ironically, the People's Party, like, they acknowledge that there is this like globalist threat and that there's wealthy people and all of this kind of stuff, but their solution is to subserviate themselves to those forces, right? Because they don't understand that systems exist. They don't understand how to interact with those systems. They certainly have no understanding of like a generational issue, that like the previous generation erected a system and it is our job to dismantle that system if it is not functioning for the benefit of the society, or if it is systemically racist, for example, right? It's and they're misunderstanding what's being said to them on purpose on these issues, right? That they're saying like, well, I don't have any responsibility. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't enslave anybody. I didn't do any of that, right? And they don't understand that that's not what's being said to them. That what's being said to them is that we have to acknowledge that we erected in the past, previous generations, erected a system that is itself racist, and that if we acknowledge that that system still exists, then it is our responsibility to dismantle it. That's what's being said, but they don't acknowledge the existence of those systems. So it's all about personal responsibility. Everything is just about personal responsibility. And once you fall into that ideological trap, that everything is about personal responsibility, well, then you can just ignore the worst possible outcomes that exist in your society. Disabled people just need to get a job. Like, literally, these are the things that they are saying. Doug Ford here in Ontario has said exactly this, that his objective in interacting with the disability services, such that they exist here in Ontario, is to get disabled people back to work, right? Like this is a terrifying perspective. Like if you're a disabled person, you will be abandoned. Like you will be abandoned. And as your life gets harder and as everything gets worse, right? The only option these guys are going to leave you with is, hey, there's this suicide thing you can do, right? This maid service that you can do, right? We'll help you with medically assisted dying as you live in your shithole conditions that are degrading because you can't actually afford to live any longer, right? That's the out that these guys are going to provide for many, many people, because they refuse to acknowledge that we could just erect a system that ameliorates all of this, right? We have successful systems already that we could easily model and expand into the populace. The child care benefit, old age security, right? Disability services themselves, to a degree, you literally just need to raise the amount of funding. You don't even need to get into the extravagant stuff where you're expropriating apartments and expropriating and nationalizing stuff. You don't even need to get into that, right? If you're like a pro-capitalist type, you just need to acknowledge that like your fundamentalist ideology doesn't extend to all issues and all times. You just can't tell people go get a job. Like that doesn't actually work. It's not actually the way forward, especially if you actually pay attention to the system of it. Because the billionaires don't need that many workers, right? Like if you only have like 5 or 10 billionaires, right? Well, they don't need to hire, 200 million people, right? They don't. Because the only labor that they need done is the labor that directly benefits them. So they don't care about your society. They don't care about your structures. They don't care about your communities or your towns or any of that kind of stuff because it doesn't matter to them, right? They will hire the people who directly affect them and everybody else can go get abandoned. And then you can just kind of sniff at them and say, well, just go get a job. Well, from who? Exactly. From who? Like exactly. Like who? And this is like what the People's Party is literally talking about. And we know that they're illiterate. Like they don't actually even know what communism is. Like they literally do not know what communism is. And so you end up in these hilarious situations where you listen to these guys talk and they sound like communists. Because communism, big shock, has a lot of common sense stuff in it. But then if you start to lead them down that path, right, and show them, hey, like, Lenin literally said this. Oh, that's communism, oh my God, right? And so there's an incoherence where, I don't trust the media at all. I have no trust for the media whatsoever. They'll say to you that the media is the problem. There's huge media issues, except when it comes to China and communism. The media is to be not trusted whatsoever, except when it comes to communism, except when it comes to China. And Misty, you retracted your statement there. I kind of wish you wouldn't. We have to be telling these things. We have to be making these statements. We are abandoning our disabled. We are abandoning our poor. And the result is going to be horrific for us. It is going to be horrific for us. Like we need to be expressing what is happening to us in the real world and sending it out so that people cannot move forward in denial. As I've gotten older, I kind of came to see Jon Stewart as part of the system. He wasn't really acting against it. That he ended up just being the Democratic side of the Democratic. Like I see that right now with Seth Meyers. Every time I watch any political thing on YouTube, like anytime I watch literally any political show or anything on YouTube, the next thing they recommend to me is Seth Meyers. And it's because Seth Meyers is literally still covering Donald Trump. Like, he doesn't really talk about what the Democrats are doing. He doesn't really talk about that, right? And I feel like the entire media structure is moving to a position of demonization of the Republicans in favor of Democrats without actually critiquing the Democrats and without actually saying, like, Joe Biden has raised the amount of funding for police service recruitment by double. He's raised, there's 70% more ICE detainees under Biden than there was under Trump. He bombed Syria, bombed Somalia. They just don't talk about it. It's just not in the discourse because it's important to them to create a false distinction between Trump and Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans. And Jon Stewart's part of it, right? Like Jon Stewart had his show over the Bush years, and then literally Obama gets inaugurated and he retires. Like, yeah, he didn't want to critique Obama. He didn't want to critique a Democrat. He doesn't really do that. If any millionaire is talking, I assume they're full of shit and move on. Yeah. That the only reason any of these guys are telling you the truth, the only reason any of these guys will tell you the truth is to set you up for a bigger lie. That's it. And that's like straight up CIA, right? That there's CIA documents about controlled dissent. That once an issue becomes too obvious that you can no longer lie, that you can no longer state that, oh, it doesn't exist or this is conspiracy or any of this, then you admit that it's real so that you can control the dissent, so that people don't break hard on it. I thought he was retired just before Trump. No, he was not around for the Obama years, right? That Jon Stewart, he bounced when Obama got in. Because, I mean, I think he knows what his game is, right? Jon Stewart is aware of what his game is. His game is to be part of the Democratic establishment. And you can't, and you can only critique the establishment political system so much, right? Like someone like Bill Maher, for example, like current modern day Bill Maher is basically just like a kind of a liberal type whose perspective is pretty entrenched in capitalist wealth. But remember that he said on television that the United States deserved 9/11, and they took his show away for it, right? So that, like, to think that these people are not beholden to the political structure that they're there to critique or comment on, I think is lunacy. Obviously they are. Like, people have lost their shows. People have lost their positions. People have lost all kinds of things and have had fallings out. And I think that Jon Stewart took a look at what it was he did, or does, right? Which is to skewer and critique political people. And he knew that if he started doing that to the Democrats, well, he wouldn't get invited to brunch anymore, would he? So he left. So he stopped. And you have a very similar trajectory for someone like Steve Colbert, right? Like Steve Colbert's show was brilliant. It was a phenomenal lampooning of people like Bill O'Reilly and all this kind of stuff. And then once Obama shows up, he just sort of disappears, and now he's a late night talk show host, right? It's because these guys know who pays their bills. They know where the money is coming from. They're aware of it. Yeah, I think if he was around today, his show would be very Seth Meyers-esque. Yeah, I've heard that Jon Stewart's got another show cooking, that he might be coming back with another show. We'll see. We'll see. I've heard the same thing about Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's been talking about doing another show too. So we'll see about that as well. And don't get me wrong, like I think that their critiques are accurate. Like I think that they are accurate, but they're part of the game. Right? They're part of the game. They're not making the accurate statements of critiquing the system on a whole. They don't present the democratic structure as an alliance, right? That they are on the one side and that there is another side. Yeah, I'm sure it will be sufficiently liberal. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. That you've got to maintain the idea that it is possible for the system to improve, right? That you really want people ratcheted to the line that they're willing to tolerate, and then you can, just as they're about to step over, you throw them a little bit. But you never want to push them back. You always want them on that line. So they're constantly ratcheted right here at all times. And figures like Seth Meyers, figures like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, they play into this. Right? That they critique the system from the perspective of the Democrats. And then the Democrats get in and pretend like they're improving the system. And for some reason in America, that's good enough. That you can just pretend like you're interested in improving the system and people will buy into that. And I feel like in Canada, people are losing interest in that, right? People are, it seems more and more that Canadians are not buying into this idea any longer. That Canadians want some serious things to happen. Canadians want supports in place. Canadians want to move away from capitalism. They want to see genuine reform, at least. They want to see ideas that are working, at least, right? And it's just not happening. And because it's not happening, people are saying, well, the whole nation feels fractured. Only 10% of us are happy with the outcome in the federal election. 90% of Canadians unhappy with the outcome. Like, this should be gigantic flashing red lights. This should be gigantic flashing red lights that are impossible to miss, even for like far-right fascist types, right? If you're like a far-right fascist type, this should be a blazing, firing red light for you. You should be very, very concerned about what's happening in your society. Like, are you actually interested in this place going to war with itself? Because that's what's happening. Like, that's what's happening. Yeah, people seem to be separating into more groups now. Yeah, because that's all they have left, right? That's all they have left. That they know that the institutions around them are not going to help them. They know that there is high levels of abandonment. And so people need to form up groups. And so gangs, right? Militia groups, churches, right? All of these sort of small-scale organizations that exist within the society and always have, right? Mafia groups. These are the groups that are going to gain power as the structures around them decay and become not worthwhile. And yeah, forming into groups is instinctive. It's a social benefit for sure. And we just don't seem interested in maintaining even the edifice of a society any longer, right? Like, the existence of the Conservative Party alone has got to be terrifying for people. Like, it's literally an organization that's talking about dismantling social services. Like, it's very upfront about that. It's very open about that. And yet we keep voting for them. Like, that's the blistering part about it. We know what they're going to do. It's very clear what they're going to do. They're not really hiding what it is they're going to do. And then when they get into power, they do it. And everyone seems fine with it. It's very shocking to me. It's very shocking to me that we're not just rejecting these guys. And again, to have like a little silver lining on it, the populists did reject everybody in this last election. What was this if not a full-scale rejection of all of those parties, right? Nobody gained any power. Almost everybody lost seats, with the exclusion of the PPC and the NDP, right? What is that if not a whole-scale rejection of neoliberal capitalism and the neoliberal structure? It's funny how neoliberal capitalism seeks to isolate us, and yet we form groups instinctively. It's like capitalism actually is not natural. Yeah. What? You mean drawing invisible arbitrary lines around on the land and claiming that those invisible arbitrary lines are sacrosanct? And saying that this piece of paper that my great-grandfather wrote on and said, I own this parcel of land with this invisible line drawn around it, it isn't natural? What? Like, once you recognize that we're capable of, like, a mass-scale delusion like money, like, money is invented. We made it up. It doesn't exist, right? And yet it is the primary driving force of our society. Like, once you understand that we're capable of that kind of mass delusion, then there's absolutely nothing that we're not capable of, right? It's a magic line, see? Yeah, exactly. It's the determining factor on whether or not a person can, eat or not, or any of this kind of stuff. And it's just getting stranger and stranger as time moves forward. And I'm deeply concerned that we're living in the timeline where the PPC are the party that's going to jump up and seize power eventually, and the result will be predictable. Like, it's very predictable. This is the thing. Like, people are running around with, like, confusion and all this kind of stuff. To me, it's quite predictable. Like, if we continue to abandon the society, and let's be really clear, like, the Liberals actually did pass, like, social support services over the pandemic, the CERB, right? Good for them. But the reason why everybody is skeptical of them is because they've made it very clear that they want to remove those supports. And most people are saying, like, wait, why? Why remove those supports? It's odd that you want to remove those supports instead of tax the people who made billions of dollars over the course of this pandemic. Like, that's odd. It's very strange. How many versions of left versus right can I make? That's what the political climate looks like to me. And that's another part of it, right, Matthias, is the fracturing, the breaking apart of things. Don't let leftists organize and group up. That's straight up a tactic, right? That if you just break the left up into its, like, Marxist Leninists and Maoists and Trotskyites and Stalinists and all of these guys, and then have them fight about it, they'll never actually fight back against you, which is the point. Yeah, it's like consumer capitalist politics, shopping for change, but there isn't any change, not really. Like, not really. Like, at this point, people instinctively understand that we need a systemic change, that we need a systematic change to the way that we do business. Like, we're becoming more and more aware of that. Instinctively, I think. Like, maybe people aren't able to articulate it effectively, but it does seem to me like people instinctively want that change. Whether or not they're going to actually do anything about it is another question. The COVID lockdown demonstrated three things. Our economy collapses as soon as it stops selling useless stuff to over-indebted people. It is perfectly possible to reduce pollution, and the lowest paid people in the country are essential to its functioning. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hard to digest how we've come so far, but still won't take action to provide basic human needs such as shelter, food, and healthcare. And even worse than that, Matthias, is when you start to say, hey, we should provide shelter, food, and healthcare. The response you'll get in many cases is an outright admission that the system we live under now is coercive. Oh, well, if people have shelter, food, and healthcare, why would they ever go to work? Right? Like, why would they work for these capitalists? It's like, oh, like, literally you are admitting, full-scale admission, that if we don't withhold and coerce people with the threat of homelessness and starvation, that they won't participate in the labor force. Like, that's a very brutal position to take. It's a very brutal position to take. And an admission that these guys are really not interested or capable in understanding how to build something like a community or a society of any sort, right? That mistrust and coercion must be at the heart of the structure. Because fundamentally they know that this isn't a society, it's just a business. And that the only way to run this place must be as a business is run, which is through coercion. Yeah, so what's the holdup? I keep asking myself that, Matthias. What's the holdup? Yep. I think there is a lot of, like, hesitancy regarding COVID. I do think people are still very concerned about COVID. Although, like, in good news, it seems as though COVID, there we go. 466 cases in Ontario. That's fairly low for Ontario. I was thinking we were going to break through and get the 1,000. Seems like the vaccine is being effective. That the vaccine is actually going to keep the case numbers low. And, but I mean, you're seeing 11 fatalities, right? Like this, it's still a major issue, clearly, but it hasn't gotten completely out of control. When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. Yeah. Yeah. And if they're going to call you a communist, you might as well just go along with it, man. That's my position. You might as well just go along with it. Oh, here's a couple of... Oh, yes, I wanted to share this. This is really what I wanted to share. China's poverty line and number of poor population, right? Here's the numbers, right? China's poverty reduction, poverty eradication miracle in numbers.
So this idea that we can't do anything about these things, that, oh, these are just natural things that naturally occur, is bullshit. Staggeringly bullshit, right? So the yellow line that you're seeing here is the number of poor in the population. The poverty line, based on the 2010 price index, is the line that China set for itself for what is the poverty line, right? That's why you see this big spike in poor population numbers, and why you have these spikes, because they themselves kept changing the line of what is poverty, right? And you can see the big jump that happened here in 2010. And so they had this big jump, and so of course that follows with a big jump in the amount of poor population. But then you see since then, right, a very steady increase on the poverty line with a steady decrease down, right? That they are just simply saying we are eliminating this problem from our society because we choose to do so, right? Like the Chinese are outright saying we are not going to have poor people in our society because we're deciding not to. That this is something that the capitalists do not want people to understand. That we can simply make the choice as a people. And as we go down, on July 1st, China declared that it has reached its first centennial development goal, building a moderately prosperous society in all respects, and it's marching in confident strides towards the second centennial goal of building the nation into a great modern socialist country. To decipher what that means in the context of where China is now and where it's heading, the Global Times is publishing a series of multimedia projects. This infographic focuses on figures and indexes that underscore China's poverty eradication miracle. China's poverty line versus the global poverty line. So in China, the poverty line is $2.20 per day, whereas the rest of the world, it's $1.09. Number of impoverished counties, you can see as time has moved forward, they're dropping it down. Annual per capita disposable income for rural impoverished residents, that number has been increasing. So larger disposable income for their residents. Ratio of villages having access to broadband internet. By 2017, 71% up from 40% in 2013. Like, think about that. Like, we have all kinds of places here that don't have access to broadband internet. And here in Canada, we pay the highest amount of money for our internet while getting the worst service. Number of students from poor rural areas enrolled at national key universities. We've got 100,000 up from 68,000. These are enormous successes. These are enormous successes that if any society achieved this kind of thing, people would be celebrating it. But because it's one that's a socialist society, we're supposed to ignore it. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. Like, power supplies in poor areas. China implemented the National Action Plan on 100% power supply coverage, 2013. 2015, all residents had access to electricity. 2016, it launched a plan to upgrade rural power grids. And by 2020, all county-level administrative units in China were connected to major power grids. These are enormous successes. And they're happening not because of free market capitalism. They're happening not because of some kind of invisible hand moving through, but because the people of China are saying that's what we want, and so they're getting it. Like, that to me is the narrative, right? Like, the people of China are saying this is what we want, and they are getting it. Whereas we are saying things like this is what we want as a people, and none of that is happening. None of the things that we want for our society are happening. And I feel like this last election is really, really indicative of this. That we know we're not getting what we want. We know none of our politicians are standing up and offering us what we're asking for, right? Like, we could eliminate student debt in a day. We could eliminate student debt. The Chinese have made it illegal to use cryptocurrencies. We could do that. There's all kinds of things that we could do, but we're just not. And my deep concern is that as we continue to abandon the populace and as we continue to disenfranchise people from our society and as our electoral system becomes incapable of responding to the needs of the populace, not only are we going to have a rising demagoguery within that system, but we're also going to have larger and larger acts of civil violence. And I don't know what we can do about it outside of protesting and getting into the streets. But we just seem unable to do so. I would happily live in some poverty and do without if I knew the government was seriously investing in reversing climate change for a better future, for example. Yeah. Imagine building a society without constantly having to fight to do it. So much energy for work instead of self-defense. Sounds nice, yeah. Well, not happily, but I would be willing and feel proud for the sacrifice. And that's just it, right? That if we were all facing up to the problems that we have, and there was a sacrifice that was needing to be done to do it, like this society literally went to war, like to one of the most brutal wars that has ever happened on Earth. World War II was one of the most vicious wars ever, right? And people went to that war and they sacrificed a lot, but they felt as though they were doing it for a purpose, for some kind of greater good. And the people of China have the same sort of attitude about how they have gotten themselves out of poverty. Like, one of the criticisms that I hear a lot about China is that it's sweatshops and slave labor. And it's like, they know, like they're living through it. They, as a people, are living through it. But that's the sacrifice that they are willing to make in order to pull themselves out of poverty, to get away from this century of humiliation, to get away from the grinding poverty that they know exists in their country, to propel their society forward and create something better for the next generation, right? There's a whole movement. One of the brilliant things, there's what's called a Made in China movement. Right? So you see on your lapels, like everything says made in China. Well, the people of China are quite proud of that, right? They're quite proud that all of these lapels and all of these tags say made in China. And why shouldn't they be, right? They as a people have made a grand sacrifice for their next generation, for their next iteration. And we just seem completely unable to do the same, right? And like, to bring it into the COVID conversation, right? Well, so what if there's a mandate, right? So what are we asking people to sacrifice, right? We're asking them to sacrifice their freedom of choice in regards to this issue. It's not a very serious sacrifice, honestly. Go in, get a shot, like get a poke in your arm once, right? It's not a very serious sacrifice, and they're incapable of it, right? Like literally their grandparents, and in some cases their parents, were being shipped off overseas to go fight in trench warfare. Like, that's a fucking sacrifice, right? To face up against the Nazis in order to fight an existential threat, right? There's a real fucking sacrifice, right? Sacrifice your lives, sacrifice your limbs, sacrifice your youth to this endeavor, to this war effort. Like, there's a fucking real sacrifice. And now these guys are telling me that they're not willing to sacrifice sitting in a chair and getting a shot in their arm once? Like, get fucked. Like, get fucked. Something has gone desperately wrong with the society. Like, we don't have this, we simply don't have the concept that sacrifices do need to be made for the greater good. And it's especially obvious in this circumstance because the sacrifice is so minuscule, right? Oh, no, you don't have the choice. That's it. It's just their choice. That's it. It's nothing significant. It's nothing real. It's literally, a couple of hours in an afternoon sometime, right? Maybe let's make it the worst possible case scenario for them. It's one day out of their life. And then they'll feel a little drowsy for a couple of days because that's how the vaccine seems to be operating on a lot of people, myself included. And they just can't do it. So, like, if you think about it in terms of like a competition, and the Americans certainly do think about it in terms of a competition, well, you can't compete. You can't compete against a nation if that nation is willing to actually make sacrifices, right? The Chinese people are willing to make sacrifices for their society and for their children. They're willing to do that. It's very obvious that they're willing to do that. We're not. We're not willing to make any sacrifices whatsoever, right? For the major detriment of our communities and for our societies. And because we're not willing to make those sacrifices, well, we're going to get shellacked on the global stage. China's going to take over, right? When you look at the USSR losses in World War II, it's staggering, but they got them. Well, and also the USSR, like, they knew what would happen if they lost that war. Like, they know. Like, the Germans were the Nazis were very, very upfront about what they were doing. They weren't trying to be secretive about it. That was sort of the big, I don't want to say shocker, but it was a learning moment for me as I continued my research on World War II and the Nazis, was the realization that, oh, everyone knew, right? It's not like Hitler was walking around like being on the DL about any of this shit. He literally was holding a book in his hand that said in it, we need to round up the Jews and kill them, right? He outright would say that he intended to kill the communists, right? One of the first things that he did, like, he didn't start by rounding up the Jews. It's not the first thing he did. He rounded up the Marxists and the communists first. That was the first concentration camp that he erected. And it was very obvious. It was very clear cut, right? So the USSR, like the communists knew what would happen if they lost that war. They knew what would happen, that their country would be subjugated. They understood that. And if you are under those kinds of conditions, and we've seen this as time has moved forward, like, why do the Americans keep losing to small nations? The Americans lose to Vietnam. The Americans lose to Afghanistan. Why? Because when it comes down to an existential threat to not only yourself or your family, but also your nation and your culture and your history and your heritage, you will fight to the death to the last man. We've seen it over and over again. While the Americans are busy like dropping bombs from afar or all of this kind of stuff, their soldiers aren't willing to fight to the death to the last man, right? These guys didn't sign up for this shit. They didn't sign up for this, right? They signed up for like free healthcare and free education. That's what they're signing up for because the society doesn't offer it. And, you know, they go home with like massive PTSD. They go home with like massive mental disorders that get ignored largely. And so, of course, the USSR fights the way it did and fights to the last man. And Adolf Hitler himself admitted that the reason why he loses on that front is because he underestimated the productive power of the Soviet Union. Hey, Duke, how you doing? Hi, diddly ho. Well, someone's in a good mood. Okay, guys, now that Duke's here, I am just going to take a quick break. Do I have a video? I'm just messing with you, Duke. Did I have a video? I don't have a video. So we're going to do a chair stream, guys. We're going to do a chair stream. Let me put up a good... here's a great Malcolm X quote. 1 second. Like, it's odd to live in this society right now. Like, it's odd. It just feels like so much could be resolved. So much could be resolved if we just all got on the streets. If we just got on the streets and said, like, no, this is all bullshit. We just went there and didn't leave. Like, I feel like a week or two of that would impact things so much more than 3 election cycles. But there's just this, like, deep unwillingness to do it. There's just this deep, deep unwillingness to gather the people who are around you and go and do it. And I used to think that it was like a sense of confusion or a not knowing where to go or anything like this. But more and more I'm seeing that it is an unwillingness, that people are just not willing to do it. And I can't understand it. I can't understand it. All right. Well, guys, to lighten the mood a little bit, you know the song. And if you're in the chat and you don't know the song, this is my Care Bear stare against neoliberal capital. This is Antarctica is covered in ice. Got asked a question by my niece who's 5 years old. What's the world gonna be like when I'm grown? I looked up at the crimson smoke-filled sky. I thought, what's the harm in telling one more lie? I said, everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. And Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? The burning sun won't leave a paper trail. Why work so hard if it's too big to fail? And what's the point of feeding this machine if it won't make the world in our dreams where everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets? You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. And Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? And I know one day my maker I will meet, when death's sweet kiss comes and sweeps me off my feet. I hope I then will learn a little more. I'd like this place to be better than before, so everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. And Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? When everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. And Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? And I know that we can do it. I know that we can. In many ways, it is just an insistence that we do have to move forward with love and empathy and compassion. That we are going to have to make some sacrifices, but the sacrifices that we are going to have to make will be easier to deal with than the outcomes of ignoring the problems that are around us. That we seem to want to retreat into isolation when it's exactly the opposite. That we all need to grab hold of one another and take each other by the hand and say genuinely and with conviction that we are actually all in this together. I keep saying the earth wants to be a garden. And it's true, you know. The earth wants to be a garden. We've forgotten that it's the earth that created us in the first place. That we came from the earth. We are of the earth. We are part of the system. But we've fallen out of balance with it. And the earth is more than capable of healing itself. And if all we did is stopped what we were doing, we would see very clearly that all of our attempts to destroy the planet are very much like a child squalling in his mother's arms. And if we want to be here to witness the absolute miracle of the earth healing itself, all we have to do is stop. And I begin to wonder why we can't. What is it that's pushing us along? What momentum is carrying us along? When it's so obvious. When it's so obvious that we simply need to stop. Have I read the short story, The Machine Stops? I have not. A short story by E.M. Forrester. How long is this? How long is this? Get away. This isn't the actual thing. Ah, well. I'll take a look at it. I assume... here we go. I'll stick here. Is a science fiction short story. The story was republished. Included the story set in a world where humanity lives underground and relies on giant machine to provide its needs.
predicted technologies similar to instant messaging and the internet. Wow. The story describes a world in which most of the human population has lost its ability to live on the surface of the earth. Each individual now lives in isolation below ground in a standard room with all bodily and spiritual needs met by the omnipotent global machine. Well, I'll definitely give this a read. How many words is it? Short stories can be really, really powerful. Like I feel like, especially when I read even excellent authors, people like Charles Dickens, I find that you can really tell that these guys were being paid by the word. You know, you can really tell that these guys were being paid by the word. That like they'll spend an awful lot of time describing what like a brick wall looks like, that kind of a thing. And I like short stories because they often just get to the point of things, and they just get they allow your imagination to fill in a lot of the gaps. Tolkien is very much like that. Although I don't think Tolkien was ever like published in that manner, was he? Was Tolkien ever published in the manner of being paid by the word? I think that he was just writing what he wanted to write. Like, you got to remember that Tolkien was a guy who like invented a language and shit. So this guy was like just writing stuff. And I think in a lot of cases, he was writing stuff for the enjoyment of his family mainly. And I'd be very curious to find out if Tolkien's success was ever like, did he ever see that coming? Did he ever predict that? You know, like it'd be really interesting to find out that somebody like Tolkien was literally like, oh yeah, I just made this book because I thought it would be nice for my it'd be nice for my family, and then all of a sudden it's like an international sensation, like making like big blockbuster movies and stuff like this. Yeah, Tolkien was a professor. All the writing was a hobby. Exactly. So it'd be really fun if to find out that like, oh yeah, I just sort of expected that I would die and this would like get shelved and nobody would care about it. But instead of that, it's like one of the most recognizable pieces of lore that exists, and like spawns like generations and generations of different, like Dungeons and Dragons comes out of Tolkien all the way. If it's not for Tolkien, you don't end up with D&D. Like, think about how powerful that is, really. That like Tolkien created a universe that was so enticing and so interesting that people invented a system to pretend to be in it. Like that's something. Like there's something strange and beautiful and interesting about the idea that there are people who want to exist in the universe that you've created so desperately that they build a game in order to do it. How fun. I would love it would be what a treat it would be to speak with somebody like Tolkien and see. I wonder if he's looking down from wherever he is now, being like, I can't believe it. That's astounding. What have I got here? Oh yes, here's an article that I'll actually probably read. Yeah, I forgot about this. But the capitalist would say nothing of value is produced in the absence of a profit motive. Exactly. Certainly the time you spend with friends and family, with your own children, right? The time you spend on your hobbies, like none of that matters, right? That's of no value because you didn't make any money on it, right? That's why the people who defend capitalism always sound like crazed sociopaths to me. Like somebody like Kevin O'Leary, for example. Like Kevin O'Leary sounds like a madman. Like the world that he wants to live in seems very dark and grim to me. And even when you listen to like somebody like Elon Musk or Gates or any of these guys talk, like the world they're envisioning sounds very bleak indeed. That the secret to living in the world is
selling yourself to neoliberal capitalism, right? Is this manic pursuit. And it ends up being kind of like a restatement of the old Nazi phrase, right? Like, work is freedom. Okay, work is freedom, eh? Work for who? For what? To do what? What kind of freedom? Freedom for who? To do what? Those are questions that capitalists do not like to answer, right? They just want you to fall into the slogan, right? Oh, freedom. Oh, okay. Freedom for what? To do what? For who? Right? Like, because if you listen to like the ancient Athenians talk about freedom, right, you can find out pretty quickly that what they meant was freedom for male landowners, right? And freedom for male landowners to continue owning slaves. That's what was meant when they were talking about freedom. So what are we talking about when we're saying freedom? Man, the King Midas myth is like thousands of years old, and people think you can eat gold. Yeah. That kills me, dude. Anytime I see any, like, people do an article and there's like, yes, this has gold flakes on it, I'm literally like, tax these motherfuckers. Get rid of this. Are you fucking kidding me? That you're literally putting like gold flakes on your food? Get the fucking shit out of here. Get the shit out of here. Like, that's unbelievable. Yeah, freedom for the capital to produce and money to move. Exactly, right? Who cares what? Who cares who it hurts? And the idea that, like, this is becoming. We were just speaking about Tolkien, so it's worth stating. It's becoming indistinguishable from simply saying "let chaos reign," right? That, like, the Nazgul would be saying, like, yes, we need the One Ring in order to have freedom, right? And the freedom they're talking about, of course, is to subjugate all of humanity, right? And to spread the darkness of Sauron throughout the world. That the Nazgul's version of freedom is not a freedom that anyone would find tolerable. And yet plenty of humans find themselves saying that they want to do it for freedom, right? Like these guys in the South. Oh, my freedom matters more than your health and safety. Like, this is a statement that I have heard said by these guys, that my freedom to choose matters more than your health and safety. Like, so that's a freedom to spread around a deadly virus that is actually a threat to humanity, right? So their version of freedom, like what they think is freedom, is very much in line with harmful ideas like work is freedom. Oh yeah, you slave your life away, and that's freedom. Oh, okay. So I'm going to read this article out because I think it's people need to understand what's happening in the society. Military this comes from the Ottawa Citizen. It was written by David Pugliese. I'm probably mispronouncing that, my mistake, but that's okay. Military leaders saw a pandemic as unique opportunity to test propaganda techniques on Canadians, Forces report says. A plan devised by the Canadian Joint Operations Command relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan War. Canadian military leaders saw the pandemic as a unique opportunity to test out propaganda techniques on an unsuspecting public, a newly released Canadian Forces report concludes. The federal government never asked for the so-called Information Operations Campaign, nor did Cabinet authorize the initiative developed during the COVID-19 pandemic by the Canadian Joint Operations Command, then headed by Lieutenant General Mike Rouleau. But military commanders believed they didn't need to get approval from higher authorities to develop and proceed with their plan. Retired Major General Daniel Gosselin, who was brought in to investigate the scheme, concluded in his report. The propaganda plan was developed and put in place in April 2020, even though the Canadian Forces had already acknowledged that information operations and targeting policies and doctrines are aimed at adversaries and have a limited application in a domestic concept. A copy of the December 2nd, 2020 Goslin investigation, as well as other related documents, was obtained by this newspaper using the Access to Information law. The plan devised by the Canadian Joint Operations Command, also known as CJOC, relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan War. The campaign called for shaping and exploiting information. CJOC claimed the information operations scheme was needed to head off civil disobedience by Canadians during the coronavirus pandemic and to bolster government messages about the pandemic. A separate initiative, not linked to the CJOC plans but overseen by Canadian Forces intelligence officers, culled information from public social media accounts in Ontario. Data was also compiled on peaceful Black Lives Matter gatherings and BLM leaders. Senior military officers claimed that information was needed to ensure the success of Operation Laser, the Canadian Forces' mission to help out in long-term care homes hit by COVID-19 and to aid in the distribution of vaccines in some northern communities. BLM organizers have questioned why military officials gathered information on their initiative, pointing out they followed pandemic rules and did not hold any gatherings outside LTC homes. Then Chief of Defense Staff General John Vance shut down the CJOC propaganda initiative after a number of his advisors questioned the legality and ethics behind the plan. Vance then brought in Goslin to examine how CJOC was able to develop and launch the propaganda operation without approval. Goslin's investigation discovered the plan wasn't simply the idea of passionate military propaganda specialists, but support for the use of such information operations was clearly a mindset that permeated the thinking at many levels of the CJOC. Those in the command saw the pandemic as a unique opportunity to test out such techniques on Canadians. The views put forth by Rear Admiral Brian Santarpia, then CJOC's Chief of Staff, summed up the command's attitude. Goslin noted in his report, "This is really a learning opportunity for all of us and a chance to start getting information operations into our routine," the Rear Admiral stated. The command saw the military's pandemic response as an opportunity to monitor and collect public information in order to enhance awareness for better command decision-making, Goslin determined. Goslin also pointed out CJOC staff had a palatable dismissive attitude towards the advice and concerns raised by other military leaders. The directive for the propaganda plan was issued by CJOC on April 8, 2020, but it took until May 2nd of that year before Vance's order to shut it down took effect. Goslin recommended a comprehensive review of Canadian Forces information operations policies and directives, particularly those that may impact any activities for domestic missions. There is an ongoing debate inside National Defence Headquarters in Ottawa about the use of information operation techniques. Some public affairs officers, intelligence specialists, and senior planners want to expand the scope of such methods in Canada to allow them to better control and shape government information that the public receives. Others inside headquarters worry that such operations could lead to abuses, including having military staff intentionally mislead the Canadian public or taking measures to target opposition MPs or those who criticize government or military policy. Military propaganda training and initiatives within Canada over the last year have proved to be controversial. The Canadian Forces had to launch an investigation after a September 2020 incident when military information operations staff forged a letter from the Nova Scotia government warning about wolves on the loose in a particular region in the province. The letter was inadvertently distributed to residents, prompting panicked calls to Nova Scotia officials who were unaware the military was behind the deception. The investigation determined the reservists conducting the operation lacked formal training, and policies governing the use of propaganda techniques were not well understood by the soldiers. Yet another review centered on the Canadian Forces Public Affairs Branch and its activities. Last year, the branch launched a controversial plan that would have allowed military public affairs officers to use propaganda to change attitudes and behaviors of Canadians, as well as to collect and analyze information from public social media accounts. The plan would have seen staff move from traditional government methods of communicating with the public to a more aggressive strategy of using information warfare and influence tactics on Canadians. Included among those tactics was the use of friendly defense analysts and retired generals who push military PR messages and to criticize on social media those who raise questions about military spending and accountability. The Canadian Forces also spent more than $1 million to train public affairs officers on behavior modification techniques of the same sort used by the parent firm of Cambridge Analytica, the company implicated in a 2016 data mining scandal to help Donald Trump's U.S. presidential election campaign. The initiative to change military public affairs strategy was abruptly shut down in November after this newspaper revealed details about the plan. A military investigation determined that what the Canadian Forces Public Affairs leadership was doing was incompatible with Government of Canada communications policy and the mission and principles of public affairs. None of the public affairs leadership was disciplined for their actions. Several months ago, Acting Chief of the Defense Staff General Wayne Eyre and DND Deputy Minister Jody Thomas, acknowledged in an internal document that the various propaganda initiatives had gotten out of control. Errors conducted during domestic operations and training, and sometimes insular mindsets at various echelons, have eroded public confidence in the institution, noted a June 9, 2021 message signed by Eyre and Thomas. This included the conduct of information operations on a domestic operation without explicit direction or authority to do so, as well as the unsanctioned production of reports that appeared to be aimed at monitoring the activities of Canadians. This is coming from the Ottawa Citizen, written by David Pugliese. Very concerning. Very concerning to read that our own military is viewing us as a force to be manipulated, as a force to be spied on, as a force to be misinformed, to be propagandized against. And this is always the case when it comes to these sorts of military initiatives, that what we do to our enemies, we ultimately do to ourselves. That if you treat other nations as threats when they clearly are not, then you will do the same to your own populace. And not a thing will be done about it. And that was explicitly stated, Duke. No one was punished for this. There was nothing done. None of the public affair leadership was disciplined for their actions. Like, this is high level of concern that these sorts of actions are being done without the notification of any elected official, without the direction of any body. These people are acting independently. It's deeply concerning that there is no disciplinary action for this. Because what that tells this institution and these institutions is that, well, the trouble was not the doing of the thing, it was getting caught. That they just need to try again. We got the CIA Canada, get on our level. We got guys on 4chan and Facebook from Langley for years. That's true, Bumbleguppy. You're right, dude. You're right. No, nothing. No one's better than the CIA, dude. The CIA is a very impressive organization. Like, the amount of bullshit that they're able to produce, and the depths they're willing to go to produce it. Like, that's the part about the CIA that gets very impressive. that they're like literally getting down to like the nitty gritty. Let's get the 14-year-olds as they play Call of Duty kind of shit. Like that tells you that these guys have too much money. Like if there's anything that tells you that these guys have too much money, it's the fact that people are like spending their time on fucking 4chan. Yeah, do they work for us or NATO? That's a good question, Nova Scotia. That's a good question. And like NATO is steadily eroding though. Like it's no longer really like what's its mandate any longer even? Does it even have a mandate? What they did was wrong, but let's go easy on them since they did it for the good of the country sort of idea. I think this article is part of the propaganda message. Interesting, Null. Leniency is authoritarian from the highest authority. Oh, that's an interesting perspective to take. So you think you may be of the opinion that this article and this connection to the Ottawa Citizen itself might be part of sort of the larger... To what end is what I would ask. Because the end of this is the erosion of public trust. And because which is stated pretty clearly right at the bottom here, like this included the conduct, errors conducted have eroded public confidence in the institution. So if the goal is to erode public trust, I mean, mission accomplished, right? Which is why it's dangerous to do this sort of thing. It's connected into what I was saying earlier. That if we erode the public trust, if people don't trust anything, if they don't know where to turn, if they don't know who to believe, if they don't know who to listen to, then they'll do stupid things. They'll do stupid and dangerous things. They are the Imperial Guard, yeah. It's wild to me when people think North Korea is more propaganda than Americans are. I'm like, compare propaganda budgets for just a second. Yeah. Well, and like it's completely fair to bring up North Korea because the average citizen doesn't understand what the Americans did to North Korea. Like they don't even know, right? They seem to think that the history of North Korea begins in like the 1970s. Like they have no idea that North Korea was literally leveled. Like there was not a single standing structure left in North Korea. That's something that people don't really understand about what the Americans did to North Korea. And it's not part of the discourse whatsoever. And which is why, like, anytime they send anybody to North Korea, the people are like, whoa, this is so weird, man. Everything seems so weird here. It's like, yeah, of course it seems weird, dude. Like, literally 30 years ago, this place was rubble. It's actually a bit of a miracle what's happened in North Korea, that they've rebuilt so quickly. And they've been able to get back on their feet after such a devastating war that is technically still ongoing. Now the Department of Defense knows how Canadians will react, which is kind of not at all. This story is getting no play. See, that's what's interesting to me, Duke, right? Like, is that nobody actually like, good for the Ottawa Citizen to actually do, like, this is journalism. Like, what we're seeing here is actually journalism. Unless it is the truth that it is, as Null suggests, that this is part of the propaganda grift, which is possible. Let's not forget. And I think part of the reason stuff like this isn't getting any traction is because people are just exhausted. Like, it's just exhausted. But no one, like, the question that I have in my mind is, why do this? For what purpose? To what end? And on whose behalf? On whose behalf are these institutions moving forward with these ideas? Why not ask for permission? Why not talk to people about it? Why not communicate with your higher-ups? Why not? Like, why simply move forward? What deeper message is happening here? What deeper story? And the most concerning part about it is that if they did indeed move forward with a mission that had no permission, why is nobody being brought up on charges, right? Like, why is everybody just simply being let off the hook about it? Seems to me like this is a major, major issue. But we don't seem to care. I was just listening to hardcore history about Japan between the First and the Second World War, and this was common in Japan at the time. Low-ranking officers would assassinate people without authorization, and it would be passed off as wrong, but let's go easy on them. This is how higher levels of command would do stuff and have lower-ranked guys take the flak. Oh, interesting. The U.S. isn't propagandized. How dare you? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is there a more propagandized nation? Well, guys, I have actually gone through all of my news articles today. So I found this really great lefty memes thing. So let's just have some fun. Go through some lefty memes. Psychology textbook diagrams never cease to amaze me. My boss yelled at me. I'm worthless. Depression. After cognitive restructuring, my boss yelled at me. I overthrow the boss and seize the means of production. No depression. Say the Prime Minister wants a program like this but can't take responsibility for it because it would be politically unpopular. Oh yeah, let's go take a look at the Beaverton. Beaverton's classic stuff, dude. Like, they whoever's writing for the Beaverton. Yeah. Oh shit, the same people in charge of our COVID response are in charge of our climate change response. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That would be quite the connection, Null. If suddenly there was a prime ministerial connection or there was a connection to the Liberal Party from this sort of thing. Well, and what was interesting about this is that it got shut down quite quickly, in fact. Like, they said it was launched in April and then it closed down in May. It's like a month, right? It's very quick, unless I misread the years, which is possible. But, like, it seems to me like it didn't really find its feet. So April 8th and May 2nd. So literally less than a month before it was shut down. So that's pretty impressive in terms of speed, and it seems to me like it wouldn't be effective, right? That's not enough time for this sort of thing to happen. But like, it does become a question of like, how were they able to get this far along with this? Apparently Japan was a bit different than modern military is today. I don't understand how a superior officer can be so okay with such a blatant disregard of the chain of command. Yeah, you know that thing that is central to military organization above all else? Well, and part of it, I do think, Duke, is like, do you really want to get rid of valuable assets within your organization over this sort of thing? That you could simply chalk it up to ambition, or like that you kind of shrug and go like, oh, well, they wanted to do good, just they yeah, it sounds like the suit's telling developers they want a killer app and no one knows what to do, so they create an app that literally kills people. Once you see this app, 7 days later you die. So my concern on this article, and the final point that I will land on, is that these sorts of things are extremely dangerous because they do fundamentally erode public trust. And right now, public trust is about as low as it can get. Like, people do not trust the institutions that are around them any longer. And these sorts of stories only serve to make them more mistrustful, especially about the military, right? Like, I go so far to say that in America, the military has far more control of what's going on than elected officials do, right? Chalk it up to boys will be boys. Case dismissed. Yeah, exactly. But like, how much longer until the military can do this sort of stuff? And even if it gets reported on, they simply don't stop, right? That the only reason why this particular project is abandoned is because the Ottawa Citizen picked it up, right? That the military responds to journalistic reporting by shutting the program down. How much longer until they simply don't? How much longer until like the Ottawa Citizen will come out and report something like this and the military will just be like, oh, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? Which is exactly what happens in the United States, right? Like, people report on what the military is doing. There are leaks about what the military does, right? And what do? They lock up the person who does the leak. And then they don't stop. They just keep doing it, right? How much longer until that's what we're facing up against? That's what we're facing here in Canada. It seems very serious to me, and yet, like when China and the USA say that the release of the Michaels had nothing to do with Meng, exactly. I don't think they even expect us to believe them anymore. Yeah, I think that there's something something about that. Like, I am to a point now where I'm just saying, like, why even lie? Like, why even lie? Like, who actually, like, that lie especially, who believes that? Is there literally, I would love to meet the person who is like, no, the arrest of Meng and the arrest of the Michaels and then their subsequent release, they didn't have anything they weren't tied together. Like, that's not so, like, obviously they were. Like, it's so obvious that these figures were being used as a way for these two nations to communicate to one another, right? And I actually think that moment has a lot to do with America's America's realization that China can't be fucked with. Like, they picked up Meng, and then China responded very quickly by picking up the two Michaels. They outright were saying, we're not just going to let you pick our citizens up, dude. Like, if you pick up our citizens, we'll pick up yours, right? We're more than capable of doing that. We're not just going to roll over and bark because you say so. That's a big political moment. Like, it's a big diplomatic moment. Like, that was a diplomatic scandal that thankfully resolved peacefully, right? With the release of all parties. That's a good diplomatic moment. And hopefully, like, I've got this one thing right here. Is it here? Here, I'm going to find this because it was absolutely true and it really struck me. Right. Russia doesn't want war. Russia wants to cooperate with the United States. China doesn't want war. China wants to cooperate with the United States. The U.S. makes up enemies out of thin air so that wars are more palatable. And I do think there does come a point where we have to start discussing this madcap desire for war on like a psychological or spiritual basis. That, like, why is it that we feel we must do war? Why is it that we feel that war is the answer when it so obviously is not? It so obviously is not. It doesn't achieve anything. It doesn't increase the countries that are doing it. It doesn't increase their prestige. It doesn't increase their authority or their power. It doesn't increase their respectability. It doesn't. You could make the argument that, well, it's increasing the wealth of a small group of people, but that's ultimately self-defeating. So what's the purpose of this? And I'm beginning to believe that it has far more to do about shaping the world in our image. That it has to do more with the belief that if you genuinely do believe in the idea of individualism and the power of the self, and if you genuinely do believe that yourself should be elevated above all other things, then attempting to make the world in your image or with your vision is seen as an ultimate good. And if people oppose you on this, well, then they're refusing to acknowledge the greatness of the self, of you, And clearly you are the one that is able to shape the world in your own image because you're the one that has the power to do so. And it seems to me like we are in a very spiritual or existential crisis at the moment, where we're beginning to ask ourselves, well, if war isn't the way that we're supposed to articulate and communicate, how are we supposed to articulate and communicate? And if war can't be done with China, well, doesn't that make us losers? Like, really think about this. That the United States is genuinely saying that if we can't destroy and dismantle China militarily, then we are losers. Like, it's a very terrifying way to look at the world. That you can't look at your neighbors who are doing well and think well of them. You can't look at them and think, wow, good for them for doing that. Good for them for improving things. Good for them for doing that. And I'm going to turn on my society and do the same. Or I'm going to learn from them, or I'm going to admire something that they've built. That if China builds something that is worthy of admiration, we walk away from that believing it is a threat. We walk away from that believing that it is a threat. Imagine that. Imagine if your next door neighbor built, it's the middle of winter and they built a beautiful snowman. Right? Something that everybody came by and took pictures of. And it was, oh, how lovely. And you saw that and you thought, I'm going to destroy that snowman. Why? What are you gaining? What China builds, we want to destroy. Yeah. And unfortunately for the United States, China can build faster than the United States can bomb. That seems to be the case now. And instead of taking a look at things like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a brilliant project that is being well executed, instead of taking a look at things like China's fusion reactor, China's space program, right, where they're talking about literally, in conjunction with the Russians, building a moon base. Like, nothing like that is happening in America at all. They haven't even begun the process of doing that. And we look at these things, and instead of thinking, wow, that's what an amazing thing that civilization and that society is achieving for itself and its own people, instead of thinking along those terms, we immediately say that is a threat and they need to be opposed and destroyed. And that's instantaneous. That's ingrained in us. It's almost, at this point, it's almost genetic, right? Like it's there's something going on inside of the North American mindset that says if we can't dominate it and destroy it and bomb it, then it's an extreme threat to us, because clearly, if we don't bomb it, it's going to bomb us. Yeah, it is just like it's monkeys. It's just like we're still in this kind of ape mindset of thinking that if we're not the best, then we have lost everything. And this mindset is going to go throughout America in a serious, serious way. It's going to go throughout America in a serious way, because what we do to our enemies, we ultimately do to ourselves. And the pent-up desire to destroy places like China and Russia, which we can no longer successfully do, well, we will begin to inflict that pent-up desire on our own citizenry, because we can destroy them, right? The United States military can start to destroy its own citizens, and its own citizens don't have nuclear bombs to protect themselves, right? And that's what's going to happen, especially as the United States starts to rise up and resist. And that's going to be the perfect narrative, right? That you're going to have rebels and you're going to have the empire. And it's going to be very much like a Star Wars style story. where the rebellion needs to fight back against the evil empire that has finally turned and is destroying itself. Of course, what Star Wars doesn't articulate is how that actually happens. It always ends up just being, we blew up the Death Star, and that's it. We blew up the Death Star, the Empire has been defeated. It's like, that's not actually how an empire falls. Ultimately, an empire falls because its own military no longer seeks to support it. That's the most dangerous thing for an empire. That if people just stop joining the military, like if they can't find service people to actually fill these jobs, to actually operate the drones, to actually get boots on the ground, if they can't get those people, that's how empires ultimately fall. Because the military refuses to cooperate. That's what happened to the Roman Empire. Like, every time I read up on the Roman Empire, and I know a little bit too much about the Roman Empire because of my Christianity connection, but anytime I read up on that, I always end up walking away, like, people talk about the fall of the Roman Empire as, oh, well, there's many different things, and I was very convinced. I'm literally just like, no, dude, like, the people of Rome stopped joining the military. That's what happened. They literally stopped joining the military. They stopped participating in acts such as crucifixion. They stopped participating in acts of public torture. They started to see these things as detrimental to living in a stable civil society. And because people stopped joining the military, the Roman Empire lost administrative control. Right? Because that's how they were administrating the empires, through violence. And once they lost the capability to do that, people just started declaring independence, and there was nothing Rome could do about it. And unfortunately, I think that we are actually just now beginning the process of the decline of the American empire. And it's not a clean process, right? There's a lot of crazy shit that's coming our way. There's a lot of crazy shit that's coming our way. Like, I think about the servile wars that happened in Rome. If you are familiar with the figure of Spartacus, you know about the servile wars, right? That Spartacus was actually the leader of the slave revolt in the third servile war. And I view the original Occupy movement in 2008 as the first servile war. That the first servile war in Rome actually ends relatively peacefully, which is to say there was a military victory and a military win. But then the Roman Senate actually passed reforms. And they gave something to the slaves. More than the Occupy movement actually ended up getting, in fact. And so we're yet to go through the second servile war. And the third servile war, at the end of the third servile war under Spartacus, the Roman Senate was tired of these slave revolts, and especially threatened by someone like Spartacus, who was a very competent leader. And when they crushed Spartacus finally, they took 10,000 men and they crucified them along from the major port into the road to Rome, along what's called the Agrippa Way, so that new slaves from the north who were coming in by boat, the Celts and such, would walk along the Agrippa Way and see a row of crosses, 10,000 crosses, where Spartacus and his men were crucified. And they would hear the story of Spartacus as they entered the capital of Rome. That kind of public act of domination is coming for America. For certain. For certain. It won't be a crucifixion, but it'll be something similar. And you can see the echoes of it already. You can see the beginnings of it already in the figures of Snowden, in the figures of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, right? We see what people who turn their back on the American empire, what happens to them, right? It just hasn't happened on a mass scale, and it hasn't happened publicly yet. And it will. And it will. Because the US empire, when it dies, and as it dies, it is going to turn on itself. And it is going to inflict what it inflicts across the world on itself. It's going to be a mad time, dude. It's going to be a mad time. Canada transitioning to China's orbit, I kind of see hints of it in Liberal Party foreign policy. Well, I mean, it's so insane. Like, of course you want to interact with China. Why wouldn't you? They're the second largest economy. Like, keep trading with America, obviously. America's still the biggest economy. But China's, like, right there. Why wouldn't you want to have good relations with these guys? Why wouldn't you want these? Like, for God's sakes. Like, why wouldn't you want to be at peace with each other? Like, benefit from one another. Trade with one another, for God's sakes. Just, like, improve your society, improve your lot. Do all this kind of stuff. But there's a mania. There's a mania for individualism and a worship of billionaires in this society. That we are having a very significant religious ideology and spiritual and existential crisis at the moment. It has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with economics. It has nothing to do with any of that. We are literally discussing whether or not the way to build a society is through the abandonment of the society or through the building of the society. That's actually the conversation that is happening today. Do you think that the way to build a society is to build the society or to abandon the society? And that's the discussion we're actually having today. That's how bad it's gotten. That's how bad it's gotten in America. Man, can you imagine a draft in America of millennials and Gen Z? Lamau, yeah, right. Look up fragging in Vietnam War. Yeah, I don't think the millennials and Gen Z would go along with it. They did recently pass legislation making it so that they could conscript women. That was in the most recent military budget. It is now legal for America to vote to conscript women. And the only reason you pass that kind of legislation is if you're thinking about using it. And Canada just goes along with the U.S. war plans, war on drugs idea, and provides legitimacy to their campaigns as an international partner. At least with China, we don't have to wage hot war. Well, my position on Canada, going along with a lot of these war plans and things like this, it seems as though our relationship with America can be summed up as, look, if they're bombing you, they're not bombing us. That really seems to be what it is. That we are fairly aware that these guys are psychopaths. Like, the American empire is psychotic, and we share the largest border in the world with it. So, like, how many times do you think this psychopath is willing to hear no before it'll just invade? Right? How many times do you think we would resist and actually say, like, no, like, why are you attacking Venezuela again? Why are you putting sanctions on this? What are you doing? How many times do you think it would hear that before it would just go, fuck you, and just come in and take over? Right? And I don't fuck around with this. I think America is more than capable of doing that. Like, I don't see any reason why do we think we're safe from that? Because we're white? Like, what is it that makes us feel so comfortable and safe? Like, America has shown over and over again that it's a fucking psychopath. So the Canadian solution seems to be just go along with it. Just go along with it. We don't really have much more of a choice, right? Like, what's the alternative? Most wars with external enemies in Chinese history are defensive. Yeah. I mean, like, they built a big giant wall, for God's sakes. They built like you can't get much more defensive than that, can you? Like, let's build a big giant wall. You know? Although, to be fair, the Great Wall of China was never meant to actually keep invaders out. They knew that it would never actually keep invaders out because it was too big. It was too much across two lines. It would be too expensive to maintain. So it literally was there just to buy time. Because, like, let's say the Mongolians would come, and they would get horses over the wall, right? They know how to build shit. They can get horses over the wall, so they would get a military into the wall, which happened. And so military forces would get through the wall, but the Chinese knew that they were coming because they would have, like, a couple of scout posts, and they had a way to communicate, like, hey, the Mongolians are coming. It would buy them a little bit of time. But then the big thing that the wall served is that when the Chinese eventually repelled the invaders couldn't just flee back, right? Why? Because there's this big fucking wall in the way. And it takes time to get over the wall. And if you don't give them time, you're following them, well, then you smash them up against that fucking wall. That's what the Great Wall of China really served to do. It wasn't there to keep people out. It was there to buy time and then smash people against. Yeah, Canada is a mouse next to an elephant that is America. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like we can't really, I do feel like Canada is uniquely placed, kind of spiritually, to actually stand up to America and actually say to America, can we stop this madness? That if America is going to listen to any voice, it will listen to a prime minister of Canada. If it's going to listen to anyone. And I do feel like it's going to come down to it. In terms of climate change, in terms of these endless, godless wars, in terms of all of that kind of stuff. I think it is going to come down to European nations and Canada pleading with the United States to stop. Because I feel like what we're watching right now is akin to watching, like, you have a family member that is a heroin addict, and you're trying to get that family member off of heroin. But they're much, much bigger than you, and they can beat you up if they want to. But you also know that if they don't clean up, they're going to destroy everybody, themselves included. And so there is going to be an intervention. And there has to be an intervention. It must be an intervention. Because the United States military alone, simply by its operations, is enough to destroy us with climate change. Just the operations of the United States military alone. And if we don't actually confront that, and if we don't actually beg and have an intervention and say to the United States, hey, can you fucking de-escalate? Can you de-escalate? Then it's just going to destroy us by the course of its maneuvering. And it is going to take that. We are going to have to do that. And America is going to go through a pretty serious period of isolationism, if you ask me. And it's going to be a period of isolation that is completely self-inflicted. Like, this is the thing about the United States. Everything it's doing is self-inflicted. It could very easily just not. It could very easily do all of this. It could just easily not be an enormous monster in the world. It could easily just pull back, de-escalate. If it began saying to the rest of the world, like Reagan did, incidentally, hey, let's disarm the nuclear stockpile. Let's disarm, right? Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be nice if suddenly the Americans were saying, hey, all these nukes, this nuclear proliferation that exists throughout the world, that's not healthy. That's not good. Let's all simultaneously just de-escalate the nuclear stockpile. What do you think? What do you think, guys? Just steadily, over time, we'll take out 100, you take out 100, we'll take out 100, you take out 100, right? We'll steadily just all agree all at once. Reagan did this, by the way. Like, they worship Ronald Reagan, but they refuse to talk about the fact that he was big on nuclear he wanted to deproliferate nuclear power. Putin keeps asking about it at the UN. He keeps talking about it. Like, and you know when a guy like Putin is standing up being like, hey, can we talk about getting rid of more of these nukes? Yeah. Exactly. USSR was steadily talking USA down from nuclear proliferation, just like this. And we should. We absolutely should. Putin keeps bringing it up. I'm sure Xi Jinping would be more than willing to have a conversation about getting less nuclear proliferation in the world. That's the world I would like to live in. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you like to live in a world where the largest superpowers on the planet were actually decommissioning their nuclear stockpile instead of building new forms of nuclear technology and nukes? I wish as a U.S. citizen I had any meaningful say in our government. I feel like I live in an occupied country. That's a good way of putting it, Bumble Guppy. I feel like many Americans feel that way. And I mean, Canadians do too, obviously, right? Only 1 in 10 Canadians happy with the outcome. The rise of the People's Party, right? I think that most people feel that they live in an occupied country because it's the citizens of Richistan that have invaded us, right? We've been occupied by Richistanians, and the Richistanians want to ensure that we're all working our lives away for nothing, gaining nothing whatsoever, so that they can live in Richistan. It's very much like the movie Elysium, right? Where there's this entire spacefaring society that exists because of the work of the people on the planet, and the people in the space society withhold everything from the people on the planet, and there's nothing that can be done. USA, proud defender of freedom. How their freedoms got to Afghanistan, I do not know. Don't worry. They will sell the conscription as women as feminism and creating equality. Exactly. Exactly. Being invaded economically, for sure. For sure. Well, the signing of NAFTA was an enormous capitulation to U.S. power, for sure. China's nuclear dogma is called credible deterrence, which means they are not set up to first strike, but can credibly, completely wipe out any attacker. Well, yeah, because who's the aggressor on the world stage, right? It's the Americans. The Americans are the ones that are walking around saying, we own this place, and you have to comply with what we say, right? Like it is a type of madness. Like, America is still just like a silverback gorilla. That's the best that they can do, right? That if you were to try to ascribe to them a type of sentience as a group or as an organization, they're a silverback gorilla, right? They want to own and control and dominate, and they see everything as a threat to their supremacy. We didn't do the number today. You guys want to do the number? So it's late. Let's do the fucking number. Let's do it. Let's do it. There's enough of you here. All right, everybody, pick your number. Pick your number. What do we got? I'm going with 7. I'm
Here
going
we go
with the holy
for today's number. It's September 28th.
Come on, guys. I know it's late.
2021.
I know it's late. Let's have a little fun.
10 balls.
I'm going with 7.
Each ball has
We got
a
3.
number.
We got a 4.
Numbers 1 through 10.
If it's a 7, then you guys both win, because 4 plus 3 is 7.
Swirl the numbers.
Anybody else in? Come on. Swirl the numbers.
Pick a number.
I've never once won.
Today's number is
4. Duke. Duke, 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 Duke. Good for you, Duke. You're the winner today. I hope you feel good. I hope it warms your heart a little bit. Makes you feel nice about yourself. Let's see what the Beaverton has on the table. Nice to win at something. That's right, Duke. That's right. Even if it's something like this, that you know the same energy that made you say the number 4 was the same energy that made David Lynch pull a ball out of a jar. and say 4. So in this moment, in time, and this can never be taken away from you, you and David Lynch share an existential spiritual connection that can never be broken. And on today, September 28th, 2021, David Lynch bestowed upon you the graciousness of the number 4. Movement to replace O'Toole as leader stalls after conservatives look at literally any of their other options. Yeah. Like, the Conservative Party is like, if I was to take out the bias I have against the Conservatives, and I do have a significant bias against the Conservatives, they do not really have many options, because the truth is that their ideology is corrupt, and Canadians know it. Like, that's the thing. Like, we know that their ideology is corrupt, that it doesn't have anything to do with their figure. It doesn't have anything to do with the person they put in front of us. That as long as they're still doubling down on the corrupt figure that they're putting in front of us, then we're not going to go for them. Like, in this election, O'Toole ran a competent campaign. It was a competent, well-argued, well-done campaign where he was saying a lot of really good things, and they gained no seats and lost voters. It's a critical failure for the Conservatives. And the idea that they're just going to replace O'Toole with, I've heard Paul Vier, as well as, they'll probably mention her, this woman here, I don't know, I can't remember her name. I think it's like Lindsay, or like Rona Ambrose, Michael Chong, I've heard. But like, none of those people are going to fly, because they're all saying the same thing and they have no unique perspective, right? They barely admit that climate change is an issue. O'Toole was literally saying on the debate stage, yeah, we need to do less because less is at least attainable than having like ambitious goals that we can actually hit. Disturbing UN prediction. By 2030, 80% of all newborns will be named Jackson. Oh, I loved this one. Doug Ford says he's saving all the federal COVID money to buy Ontario a pizza party when pandemic ends. This is the most disgusting thing that Doug Ford is doing. He's hoarding money, and people have been pointing it out, that he's got a nest egg of money that he's built up that he's clearly going to use to win the next election. That's clearly what's happening. That the federal government sent Doug Ford money for COVID relief, and he didn't use it. And so it is just sitting there. And it's very obvious that Doug Ford's plan is to use that money to buy himself an election. Like, and given that his opponents are weak, right? Andrew Horwath is a very weak candidate, and so is the Liberal guy, Steve something or other, Del Duca. I did it, Steve Del Duca, right? So he's just hoping that he'll float by with a slogan and a lot of money, like he did last time. China releases 2 Michaels, offers Canada loyalty card, good for deals on future hostages. In Alabama, they're spending COVID money on prisons. Good old Alabama. Always good, man. Alabama. I did want to bring this up. An odd thing has been happening on this channel right around now. The last little while, this is usually when the fascists show up. That the fascists show up and they start to cause problems. And so I've got these two things ready to go. I might as well bring them out now. Because it's best to understand that fascists see hypocrisy as a virtue. It's how they signal that the things they are doing to people were never meant to be equally applied. It's not an inconsistency. It's very consistent to the only true fascist value, which is domination. And then here, never believe that anti-Semites are completely unaware of the absurdity of their replies. They know that their remarks are frivolous, open to challenge, but they are amusing themselves, for it is their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. The anti-Semites have the right to play. They even like to play with the discourse, for by giving ridiculous reasons, they discredit the seriousness of their interlocutors. They delight in acting in bad faith, since they seek not to persuade by sound argument, but to intimidate and disconcert. If you press them too closely, they will abruptly fall silent, loftily indicating by some phrase that the time for argument is past. That fundamentally fascists are not interested in debate. They're interested in wasting your time. They're interested in creating circular and circuitous argumentation to frustrate and demoralize. That it's a method for them to spread control and domination, right? They're not actually interested in forming an ideological basis or any of that kind of stuff. And the thing that every fascist says when I'm shutting them down is, oh, you just don't want to have discourse. But the truth of it is that they are the ones that are not interested in discourse, because what they're doing is not discourse. They're not actually interested in debate or conversation, which is why they just get banned right away. I just ban them off the platform completely, straight away. I've got a very strict no-Nazi policy. And the stupidity of it is what gets me the most. It's very stunning to see how stupid these Nazis actually are. Like, no, bro, I just want to have a good faith argument with you. Just read Mein Kampf. Come on. Like, I've taken a look at Mein Kampf, bud. There's not much redeeming in it. Don't know why you're insisting. The only dangerous minority is the rich. Yeah, so did the USSR. Booyah. Exactly. Yeah, my favorite is when people come in and they do that, like, communism killed 100 million people. I'm like, you mean Nazis? Like, is that what we're talking about? Or is it the feudal monarchs that you're talking about? Like, which one of those are you defending? Is it the Nazis or the feudal monarchs? Where is the capital of the United States? In the offshore bank accounts of the 1%. Exactly. Oh yeah, I loved this. This is from Dave Chappelle. Why do we have to say that? Why do we have to say that Black Lives Matter? Now, I admit that is not the best slogan, but McDonald's already took "You deserve a break" today. And I guess it's kind of catchy because everyone else is biting it. Even the police bite it. Blue lives matter. What, was you born a police? That is not a blue life. It's a blue suit. If you don't like it, take that suit off. Find a new job. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if I could quit being black today, I'd be out of the game. And I believe him. Yeah, the USSR policy on the Nazis was the correct one, right? Like, and I don't get, like, Indiana Jones is one of the, like, great American heroes, right? Like, Indiana Jones exists on the same level as, like, Superman. And the villain of the Indiana Jones franchise is the Nazis. And he, like, literally is just walking around killing Nazis. And you're just like, yeah, that's what you do to Nazis. You just shoot Nazis. And the only time literally anyone protested about it was his own father, who was shocked that his son was killing Nazis, but didn't do anything to stop him from doing it. And now suddenly, not that much longer, not that much further down the pipe, and I'm supposed to just ignore that. I'm supposed to take a Nazi seriously when he stands up and says, oh, that's my freedom of speech and all this kind of stuff. No, it isn't. You cede your right to free speech when you become a Nazi. Nazis have no rights, right? Like, the idea that Nazis are standing up saying that they have rights is adorable, and really just proves that they are just trolls, right? They're just internet trolls come to life, and that they're not actually interested in rational thinking or discourse or anything like that. Because if they were interested in rational discourse or anything like this, they would realize that fundamentally Nazis have no rights. Isn't Indiana Jones considered family friendly because killing Nazis used to be considered the same as killing mindless robots? Yeah. Yeah, I remember I was watching Indiana Jones as like a kid. Like, I was young. And like, I would watch it with my parents, and like, Indiana Jones would kill somebody, and like, they would be like, ha, and that would be it. Because fucking Nazis don't have rights. They're not people. Right? They're like literally not considered people. And I honestly don't have a problem with that. Like, straight up. Like, I consider myself to be quite an empathetic, compassionate person, but if you are genuinely willing to stand in front of me and say that you are a Nazi, that you have made the decision to be a Nazi, then you are removing yourself from the human conversation actively. Because to be a Nazi, you begin by saying there's a minority group I wish to destroy. Like, you are outright saying in front of people's face that there is a type of person you want to destroy. You don't get to have rights or anything like that if you're going to walk around saying, hey, let's round up the Jews. Well, and especially on the political spectrum, always remember, Hitler didn't round up the Jews first. He rounded up the communists first. And so if a Nazi comes in here and says, hey, I'm a Nazi, he's literally saying my intention is to murder you and put you into gas chambers. That's what he is saying. I actually don't agree with the paradox of tolerance. Like, I think that it's a fun little brain exercise that Polanyi did. But behind every anti-communist rhetoric is always some Nazi fascist or fascist, even if you don't even identify this fact alone should disturb you. That's nonsensical, dude. Like, that doesn't make any sense what you just said. Behind every Oh, sorry, I misread it. My mistake. Behind every anti-communist rhetoric is always some Nazi fascist or fascist adjacent. Even if you don't identify as communist, this fact alone should disturb you. Well, and I don't know if I've ever seen you here. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm so sorry. Ezeil Mentore. Yeah, I find it very concerning that lots of Nazi propaganda has made its way into the popular discourse again, right? Especially in regards to communism. Like, things that are just black and white Nazi propaganda have become quite fashionable to say. Like, the conversation surrounding famines, for example, that like the big thing that communists get pegged for. Hundreds of millions of people died because of the intentional famines that were done, right? And it's like, well, like the Holodomor, for example. Only 5 nations acknowledged that the Holodomor was a genocide, right? So 5 out of like 149 nations. Even the United States doesn't acknowledge it. Like, the 5 nations are places like Austria, Ukraine, obviously, and Canada. And when you actually dig in, you find out that the reason why they're acknowledged is to shore up some sort of political victory. And then when you actually look at the documentation itself, you find out that, like, yeah, there was a famine, as famines occur, just like the Dust Bowl happened, just like the Irish potato famine happened, just like the famines in India happened, right? Like, no one's denying the existence of famines. But the idea that it was intentionally done in order to commit a genocide against Ukrainian people, there's just nothing to support that claim. And who were the people who were making that claim initially? It was the fucking Nazis, right? And why would the Nazis make that claim? In order to justify a war against the Soviets, which they did. So it's very disturbing to me that not only has Nazi propaganda become pretty prolific once again, but we're also supposed to tolerate the existence of Nazis, that for some reason they're supposed to be allowed to stand up and join in the discourse, and we're supposed to take them seriously because of some sort of free speech issue, when in order to be a Nazi, you have to first begin with the statement, I intend to murder political adversaries and minority groups. That if you're not saying my intention is to murder minority groups and political adversaries, then you're not a Nazi. Like, the two go hand in hand with one another. And the idea that we're supposed to be listening to these guys or taking them seriously, or even think laughably that they have rights, it's very disturbing to me. It's very disturbing to me. Like, pick a different ideology. Pick a new name. Make something else up. Like, if a person goes out and gets a swastika tattooed onto them, like, that by itself should be a crime. Like, it should be absolutely a crime to get a swastika tattooed onto yourself. That the person who did the tattoo, as well as the person who has the tattoo, should go to jail. And the tattoo should be removed. Like, I think that's like... I actually think that's like a centrist position. I think that's a non-political position. That if you're a liberal or a conservative and you are not saying that, I have major concerns about your actual political position and allegiances. Like, Nazism is serious. And the people that we really loved as we were growing up, like Indiana Jones, were right to murder them. You would put down a rabid dog, you would put down a Nazi. I don't see much difference. Conspiracy theories too are Nazi propaganda. They used it last time too. Yeah, you're right about that. Like, and conspiracy theories, they're used in order to spread discontent and confusion, right? That if the society can't organize itself at all, then it certainly can't organize itself against you, right? And one of the ways to discombobulate or confuse a society is to fill it with conspiracy theories. And that's exactly what's happened in America today. Like, that's QAnon all the way, right? That's QAnon all the way. It's just like conspiracy theories and nut job sort of stuff, so people can't get a grip on what's actually happening around them. And I'm very concerned about what's happening in America on this line, because the American people don't believe anything. They don't believe anyone, right? And for good reason. Like, they've been lied to so thoroughly and so effectively. And now you have like the CIA is well entrenched in a disinformation campaign online. Like, they want to misinform people. And nobody knows who to trust and nobody knows where to go. And so this allows demagogues to swoop up large segments of the population. Because if you can convince even a small minority of the population that you have the truth, and the truth is that it's the Jews that are in charge, right? Then you can do some damage. And again, I said it earlier, and it's worth saying again, like, when people critique places like China, I often hear that there's this like, no, of course China's not going to say that. Of course they're not going to outright say this stuff. It's all secret, right? There's this like unspoken secret that China is doing something, right? And they don't seem to recognize or realize that, like, the great villains throughout Western history, right? Your Adolf Hitlers, your Mussolinis, right? They weren't secretive. They didn't hide any of this. Like, Mein Kampf literally had, we should round up the Jews and kill them. He wrote that in his youth. And he held on to that book as he went into politics and as he became the Chancellor of Germany. Like, They weren't secretive about it. When the Canadians were enacting the residential school system to commit a genocide against the First Nations people, they were very upfront about it, right? They were saying statements akin to, we have to kill the Indian. Like, this idea that other nations are doing something nefarious, they just haven't talked about it. It's literally not how it works. That if a nation is going to do some nefarious shit, it's always obvious. It's always been obvious. Every single time. They're very upfront. They're very open about it. And what's terrifying is that the populace usually goes along with it, or certainly doesn't fight against it. Right? Which is why you have this situation in Germany now where they're expropriating 200,000 homes. Because they know what happens if they disenfranchise their own people. They're very well aware what happens if they impoverish and abandon large segments of their populace. They know exactly what happens. And they don't want to see it happen again. A person who believes conspiracy theories are easy to control. Look what happened to the Eaton Center. You're talking about the anti-maskers who tried to bust into the Eaton Center, yeah? For those who don't know, a group of anti-maskers broke off from the anti-mask march and attempted to charge in to the Eaton Center and actually had a conflict with the security guards there who were forcing them out. And it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning, right? That these sorts of conflicts, like after COVID is over, these types of people are going to continue doing those sorts of acts, right? Because the fascists have found an outlet. They found a home for their ideology, and they found a method to organize. And one of the things that the Nazis would do is they would go into communist neighborhoods and hold protests in communist neighborhoods in order to foment a conflict. And then when the conflict would happen, inevitably, as they were attempting to make the conflict happen, they would blame the communists and release propaganda saying how evil the communists are trying to shut down free speech and all this kind of shit. Right? The same stuff we're seeing today. And my opinion is that we should cut it off at the quick. We shouldn't let it grow. Their tactics might morph into brown shirt type activities because the police have already shown and signaled they won't stop these particular people. Yeah. Like what happened in Portland, where the Proud Boys take over the streets and the cops don't confront them. Right? And I even saw someone say once online, why don't the cops stop the Proud Boys? And somebody answered, for the same reason you don't see Clark Kent and Superman in the same spot. Like, there's a reason why people are saying ACAB. There's a reason why these guys are not being punished in significant ways, right? Because you don't need to wear a white hood if you're putting on a brown shirt. These are dark days. I feel like the days that we have today, like right now, this is something of the calm before the storm. I mean, you don't see articles like this and think to yourself, oh boy, things are going to go well. Like, right now, it does seem like the corporate state is happy with this kind of constipation. Because the corporate state's already in control, right? They don't need big wins politically, right? They're already in control. So what they need now is to calcify the system. They need to gum up the works as much as they can. That for the corporate owners, the calcification of the political system is itself a victory. In the United States, it's obvious, right? Literally, Mitch McConnell's just say no statement, right? Because If you just say no and you ensure that there's no political action and there's political inaction, well, the corporate owners still own the place because they do. They own the place. There's been a coup. There's been a political coup. And lots of Americans don't really realize it. They're still playing the game that the Democrats and the conservatives are at odds with, and the Republicans are at odds with one another when they're not. They're allies. And so what's important for us is to get to know our neighbors better. It's important for us to get to know our neighbors better. And I keep saying that for myself as well, that I need to get to know my neighbors better. Because when things get real, and they will, it's our neighbors that we'll rely on. It's the people who are directly around us that we'll be relying on the most. Well, we've hit that time, as we do. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in and listening and participating. It soothes my soul. It is a balm to know that there are other people in the world who are thinking the way that I'm thinking. Please tell your friends. Please tell your family. Please like, share, subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you've got $1 jangling in your pocket. Always remember, you are a divine being, standing in divine energy. These billionaires will spend hundreds of billions of dollars to gaslight you into believing that something else is happening. We shouldn't let them. Good luck. We're going to need it.